Chapter 239. Lilith also had the beauty of the Windrunner family, but her beauty was more reserved. She was not as lively as Aurelia and Sylvanas. The wolves behind Lothar were stunned again. Lothar's eyes were also filled with surprise. Lady Aurelia, I'm a little confused." Aurelia took a deep breath. She seemed to be making up her mind about something. She took out a sealed letter from her waist pouch. "This is a letter from His Majesty Anastrian to the Alliance's Commander-in-Chief." As Lothar opened the letter and quickly scanned through the human language, Aurelia was also explaining the nature of this support to the others. "Because Sir Lothar is the last descendant of the Arthi bloodline. Our ancestors have sworn to always help your Emperor Thoradin and all his relatives. Even His Majesty Anastrian could not deny that obligation. He has sent this combat team to thank you for your help." Lothar repeatedly read the letter to make sure that he did not read it wrong. The letter only wrote about a small fleet consisting of 4 light destroyers and 8 ultralight scout ships. There was no mention of the Ranger unit or the Ranger generals. "Then what's the matter with you and your Ranger unit?" Lothar asked. "My sisters and I came here of our own free will," she announced proudly, puffing out her chest. At the same time, she subconsciously flicked her golden hair that could sell shampoo advertisements. She was like a warrior who had sharpened her sword and repaired her armor, ready to charge into the battlefield. "I have a completely different view from my people. I sense the evil behind the battle. This will be infinitely more serious than my king imagines. If the Horde is as cruel as you say, then the dwarves, high elves, humans, all intelligent life on this planet will face the danger of destruction. When the kingdoms of the humans and dwarves are destroyed, our forest will not be able to hold on for long." She fearlessly looked at Lothar and the other kings behind him. Only then did everyone realize that this beautiful woman's confidence and boldness came from her glorious battle experience. In fact, before Thoradin the Great was born, this woman was already very famous in the war against the trolls. That's right. The High Elves were superhumans with eternal life. And Aurelia should be over 3,800 years old. In terms of combat experience, Lothar's ancestors couldn't compare to Aurelia's. At this moment, Aurelia seemed even more warlike than the Beastmen and more righteous than the Holy Knights. What kind of sentiment was this? Not only did he bravely join the war that even his own country opposed, but he also brought along the elites of almost his entire family. No king or general present was blind. Everyone could see that most of the Rangers had the Windrunner family crest on their badges. Even the elite troops of Duke Mograine of Rotterdam, who was commonly known as the High Lord and had a large fief, were nothing more than that. Aurelia had definitely dug out all the secrets of the Windrunner family. Lothar was almost moved to tears. Antonidas, who was behind Lothar, obviously had a different opinion. He noticed that Sylvanas was covering his mouth and snickering behind Aurelia. The old great mage spoke. "Yes. Why doesn't anyone praise Madame Aurelia's beauty? I remember when a deputy commander of the Alliance met the Princess of Rotterdam, he not only praised Princess Kalia's beauty, but also presented her with a beautiful magic rose. Now Aurelia and Madame Sylvanas are so beautiful. I don't think His Excellency Duke Marcus would be so biased, would he? What the hell are you doing?" At this moment, Lang, Andoin, and Duque glared at the old man. Everyone could tell that Aurelia had probably brought her family's private troops over for the sake of Duque. "What are you messing around for?" Sylvanas's gossipy soul was burning fiercely, and he just so happened to add, "Oh? Is that so? Is the Princess of Rotterdam really beautiful? What kind of magic rose is it?" I'm not as ingenious as Sir Marcus, but it's something like this." Antonidas flipped his wrist, and suddenly, an ice fire rose with ice on the outside and fire elements flowing on the inside appeared in his hand. Of course, those who had seen it would know that it was quite different from the one made by Duque. This was also deliberately done by the old man. The old man even ran over and offered the flower to Sylvanas. This is a compliment to your beauty." "Thank you." It was really a compliment. Antonidas and Queen Sylvanas had also forced Duque and Aurelia into a corner. Duque was now very sure that Queen Sylvanas definitely knew something and was making a fuss. And Antonidas, this old man, is a bit sinister. Not only Duque, but everyone could tell that Antonidas obviously did not want the Princess of Rotterdam to marry Duque. Even if it was only a possibility, he had to eliminate it. That's right. If Duque, who had control of Karazhan, really went into the arms of Rotterdam, it would be a huge challenge to the Dalajan's status as the Holy Land of Magic. The books of Karazhan could definitely make the magic level of Rotterdam soar many levels in a decade. As for the High Elves? The High Elves were the ancestors of magic. Seeing through the old man's thoughts, Duque couldn't help but smile bitterly. Of course, he was not interested in going to Rotterdam, which was destined to fail in history. But Antonidas didn't know. Sigh, it's all my fault for accidentally pretending to be a fool. Don't pretend, or you'll be struck by lightning. Well, now I've been forced to do something beyond my abilities. Aurelia was jealous. Beautiful women always had a kind of pride that outsiders could not imagine. If the other party had nothing to do with him, then forget it. The High Elves were a magical race that maintained eternal beauty, and the beauty of a human beauty that was only a little more than 10 years old was nothing to them. The problem was that after Aurelia returned to Cuel Salis, something big really happened that had something to do with Duque. If it were someone else, Aurelia would definitely not care, but Duque? Only Duque. Aurelia really could not ignore it. No need, Duque, I'm an old woman that's thousands of years old, what haven't I seen? I don't need such hypocritical praise. Well, that was what she said, but the look in Aurelia's eyes was completely different. That pair of seemingly calm emerald eyes were clearly filled with indignation and anger. Chapter 240. The System Elf's voice came again. Detected Aurelia Windrunner's hostility toward you under her fake expression. Do you want to load the boss template? Calculating the threat value. The threat value is quite chaotic, but it is strongly recommended that the host surrender immediately. Surrender my ass. What's the point of thinking so much? The translation of that look was, Kid, I don't like the look of you. Hurry up and coax me, or else I'll make you suffer later. Duque didn't know what happened to Aurelia. He only knew that everything had a cause and effect. If it was just because of that friendly interaction, Aurelia wouldn't have pulled out the entire Windrunner family. On the other hand, although he hadn't known Aurelia for long, Duque knew that something must have happened to Aurelia. Otherwise, Aurelia wouldn't have minded him fawning over Princess Kalia. After all, among the 3 Windrunner sisters in history, Aurelia was famous for being mature and steady. She wasn't the kind of woman who would be unreasonable and lose her temper at will. Calling herself an old woman. If Aurelia was a warrior, she would be full of anger. Duque's heart skipped a beat. Then Duque understood. Wasn't he just going to show off even more? Wasn't he just coaxing the goddess? Duque slowly turned his head and glanced at Turalyon. He didn't know why, but he felt that the holy light slowly overflowing from Turalyon's head was green. Yes, that must be the light called protection. Duque smiled. His right hand drew a beautiful arc in the air, and the fingers of his right hand closed and fell on his left shoulder. Sister Aurelia, for your beauty, please allow the Duque Orchestra to perform Ode to Joy. Ode to Joy? Did it sound like the name of a song? Was it a hymn? Or something else? But singing here? A cappella? What did the Duque Orchestra mean? Not only Aurelia, but all the Alliance elders were also curious. In any case, Aurelia had made up her mind. Since she had forced Duque to this point, she would see what he could do. As long as Duque's ice and fire magic rose was worse than that ice and fire magic rose, then he wouldn't accept it and would teach Duque a lesson. Aurelia supported her right elbow with her left hand and her right cheek with her right hand. She looked like she was waiting to watch a good show. Duque activated his arcane and ice magic circuits at the same time. A purplish-blue, mysterious magic array suddenly unfolded beneath Duque's feet. The elements in the air around him trembled and were quickly tamed, as if they had become a part of Duque's body, obediently listening to Duque's commands. Under the noon sun, in the shallow water on both sides of the dock where Duque and the others stood, crystal-clear pillars of ice as thick as an arm suddenly rose. The tallest one was more than 10 meters high. It might not be appropriate to call them pillars, But these hollow ice tubes were even finer than glass tubes carved by craftsmen. Not only were they thick, but they were also crystal clear, much more transparent than most glass in this era. The sudden appearance of so many tubes on the beach next to the dock not only attracted the attention of the high elves who were lining up, but also stunned all the human guards at the dock. What was this? Not to mention the kings and generals, even the elves who had lived for countless years and thought they were knowledgeable couldn't tell what it was at all. Percussion music? Organ? But it didn't seem like it. Duque gave Aurelia the most confident smile, raised his left hand in a very pretentious manner, and snapped his fingers. 28 hands of magic appeared next to the ice tubes in 2 rows, like musicians in an orchestra who were preparing to play instruments. Each pair of hands of magic that emitted soft white light made a relaxed posture similar to a conductor's starting hand. In the next second, the performance began. Bang! With a bang, as a team of hands of magic touched the 3rd tube on the left, the ice tube immediately flew into the air, and then, like a silver bottle exploding, it instantly exploded into countless ice crystal powder. The ice crystals made of seawater exploded and dispersed under the sunlight, forming a gorgeous effect like fireworks. Aurelia's sexy long ears twitched. She seemed to hear a sound. Me? She thought she was hallucinating, but as more hands of magic made the tubes rise into the air and explode like plucked strings, not only did the powdery ice crystals form a colorful rainbow in the sky, but she also heard a complete song. Me f, su-ah, f-e. This was a song that crossed endless time and space, civilizations and worlds. Beethoven's classic Ode to Joy was presented in the most magical form in Duque's hands. The joy and excitement in the song were all clearly and unmistakably conveyed to the ears of everyone present. Most of the human soldiers were uncouth and instinctively felt that the rhythm was pleasant and joyful. But the high-ranking nobles and kings knew what was good for them. Of course, the most knowledgeable were the high elves, who had spent thousands of years of boredom and immersed themselves in music and art when they had nothing to do. Most of the high elves were self-proclaimed nobility and looked down on a young and short-lived race like humans. They felt that humans were very uncouth, but in fact, they were not much better than the so-called barbaric orcs. Duque had completely changed their views. Not only in their eyes, but Duque had an unparalleled talent for songwriting. There was also Duque's extraordinary control of magical elements. Most of the high elves who were rangers were not very talented in magic, but it did not mean that they had no vision. The long years had given them unparalleled experience and vision. They could almost see at a glance that although Duque's mage level was not high, his exquisite and terrifying control of magic was definitely not inferior to most of the members of the Silver Moon Council. What level was the members of the Silver Moon Council? They represented the pinnacle of the High Elves' magic civilization. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they stood at the peak of the magic field in the entire world. This was quite a high evaluation. Looking at Duque waving his hands lightly like a conductor, pretending to direct those hands of magic to play the song without making any mistakes. The 3 Windrunner sisters who were present were angry and amused at the same time. But the 3 sisters who had seen through Duque all regarded it as a small mistake in casting multiple spells. After all, normally, no one could do so many different things at the same time without making a mistake. Oh, so he is Duke Marcus, the calm Lilith said softly to herself. In the whisper of wind, Servanas laughed and said, "You really are a little guy with endless new surprises. No wonder Big Sister loves you so much," not hesitating to, "Enough." Aurelia interrupted Servanas in the whisper of wind. Ignoring the others' reactions, Aurelia the great demon queen was very satisfied. She walked over in public and gave Duque a passionate kiss. Well, unfortunately, it was on Duque's forehead. Little brother Duque was speechless. Damn. Chapter 241. In any case, as long as the demon king Aurelia was satisfied. Looking at the emerald green eyes that turned into crescent moons, Duque knew that he had finally passed the test. Unconsciously, Duque touched the place where he was kissed. That kind of touch that was softer than rose petals seemed to linger on his forehead, unable to disperse, leaving a lingering fragrance. She seemed to know that she and Duque had overshadowed the host. Aurelia returned to her serious mode. General Lothar, my people are the best scouts and sentinels. If it is an enemy on land, I can ensure that the troops will receive the news when they are 2 days away from the enemy. Lothar smiled and nodded. Thank you for your reminder. Unfortunately, our enemy is on the other side of the sea. We can only rely on Admiral Dylene's reconnaissance fleet and Deputy Commander Marcus Naga to obtain intelligence. Perhaps in the next battle, you and your people can only be used as archers for the time being, but we will ensure your safety. There is no place on the battlefield that is absolutely safe. Aurelia said seriously. I know. You and your people will know when you go there. Lothar glanced at Duque and smiled mysteriously. Before that, please wait patiently for the arrival of the reconnaissance report. Aurelia soon understood what Lothar's smile meant. First was the battle position. It was the second highest position on the 2 hills near the South Shore port. The firing holes made of hard bricks were quite strong. Even a small-caliber human artillery could not penetrate it at once. Not to mention ordinary ballistae, bows and arrows and other long-range attacks. This position seemed to have accurately calculated the range of the Elven Rangers' bows and arrows. Almost from the port to the foot of the hill, the distance of 300 meters was the Elven Rangers' range. In terms of safety, it was also guaranteed. The highest place was naturally the ballistae, catapults and cannons. The Elven archers were the second layer, the third layer was the human javelin soldiers, and further down were the 2 layers of pikemen. With this kind of 3-dimensional defense, unless the lower 3 layers were completely destroyed, the Elven archers would not be in any danger at all. Even if there was danger, the specially set retreat route along the hill and a spacious tunnel running through the entire hill were enough for the Elven Rangers to evacuate the entire position in a few minutes. Then came the encampment. Duque seemed to have predicted that the elves would come. He had specially left a quiet little valley for the elves. Not only were there a large number of towering trees in the valley, but there was also a small clear mountain spring. In addition, there were also many fruit trees. It was the harvest season, and the valley was full of fruits, which tempted the elves. This was a ranger's favorite. Aurelia was dumbfounded. Big sis, you said he's only a 15-year-old kid, but I don't see how he's young. She even knew what you loved the most. You've done your best to mobilize almost the entire Windrunner family. In the end, it's all for your little lover, right? No one would say anything about this. Why did you try to cover it up? Be frank. Servanus teased his big sister. Sister, we are sisters. I am nearly 1,000 years old. I am no longer a child. I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of. Humans are short-lived species. Since you like it, you should cherish this short period of time. But I hope that you can speak frankly in the future. There's no need to use things like world crisis or righteousness. Lilith bowed respectfully to her big sister. Aurelia was wrongly accused. If there really was something going on between her and Duque, then so be it. Among the High Elves, this kind of thing was very casual. Many of the High Elf nobles lived rotten lives. But she wasn't. She had always been clean, but after what happened, even her sisters didn't believe in her judgment of the big picture. But Aurelia couldn't refute. In the end, you've gone too far. Aurelia actually burst into tears. This time, it was Servana's and Lilith's turn to be dumbfounded. Could it be that there really was nothing going on between Big Sis and that human youth? On the other side, Duque was in a mess. He had been showing off in front of Aurelia, but High Lord Mograine had come looking for him before nightfall. Originally, Duque was quite interested in befriending Mograine. After all, he was a famous figure in the future, and definitely a hero in Azeroth's history. With Duque's intention to befriend him, the two of them quickly called each other by their names. Who knew that after Mograine pretended to talk about the situation for a while, he actually changed the topic and said that he should visit Lordaeron more often when he was free. Finally, the dagger was revealed. That Duque, actually, if you can achieve great things as the deputy commander of the Lordaeron Alliance. By then, what beautiful princess can you not marry? Why do you have to find a high elf who has a completely different lifestyle as your wife? A true noble must have a noble bloodline to be recognized by other nobles. Elves and whatnot are not bad as lovers. Ah, yes, Princess Kalia really likes your roses. She asked me to pass on a message that she expects you to have a better masterpiece. Damn, is she telling me that the Princess of Lordaeron is waiting for me? Does this mean that I have to show off in front of the princess in a more gorgeous way than I did with Aurelia today? Oh no, a more perfect gift? At this moment, Duque's heart was full of tears. He constantly hated himself. Why did I have to show off in front of Princess Kalia that night? Not wanting to say anything, Duque decided that once the second battle at the Dark Portal ended, he would return home. Oh no, return to Karazhan to focus on magic training. He would not see anyone. Originally, Duque had ordered that he would not see anyone. But in the evening, Duque's system elf and 2 of Duque's guards became vigilant at the same time. Who? A man and a woman's voice spoke in unison. The woman was naturally Duque's little maid, Vanessa. She lifted the right side of her maid's skirt at lightning speed, revealing a white thigh and a neat row of throwing knives tied to it. It was probably a thief's ultimate skill, fan of knives, throwing more than a dozen sharp knives at any suspicious target. The man was Duque's new guard, one of the first 5 holy paladins, Gavin Rad Bad Luck. There was a turning point in history. Originally, Gavin Rad, who was born in Stormwind City and was a holy knight under Lothar, would have become a member of the Silver Hand Knights, but Lang and Lothar arranged for him to be a guard for Duque. At this moment, he raised his warhammer. At this moment, 2 slender and perfect legs hung down from the eaves, and Servanus's voice sounded. Hey, Duque, did you know? Big Sister spent 3 months in the Black Prison not long ago. Chapter 242. Duque was dumbfounded after hearing that. Jail? Jail? Why would Aurelia go to jail? There was no record of Aurelia ever going to jail. What's going on? Duque's face was as gloomy as water. Vanessa, Gavin Rad, please leave for a moment. Your Excellency, Gavin Rad still wanted to persuade Duque. After all, in his eyes, the High Elves weren't very reliable. I insist. Duque was resolute. Vanessa had never seen Duque react so fiercely. She suddenly realized that this high elf named Aurelia had an extraordinary place in Duque's heart. Vanessa and Gavin Rad left. They didn't go far. They were less than 20 meters away from the house, staring at the window quietly. Servanus somersaulted into Duque's room. Servanus couldn't hide his surprise as he looked at the hands of magic that were scribbling documents all over the room. But she soon focused her attention on the person in question, and she saw a pair of eyes that were full of remorse and remorse. They shouldn't be the eyes of a carefree 15-year-old boy. They were more like the eyes of someone who had been through vicissitudes and pain. Servanus suddenly felt that she had come to the right place. Speak. I'm listening. It wasn't an order, but more like a plea. Sitting behind the desk, Duque clenched his fists and pressed the back of his fingers against his lips. That's because of a High Elf Mage Apprentice Handbook. Duque's heart lurched and his face darkened. He clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles turned white. His teeth bit his lips at some point, and the blood flowed into his mouth. It was salty. Duque couldn't help but recall that everything started when he met Aurelia after he transmigrated to this world. If Aurelia had helped him drive the wild boar away, he could have easily dragged the carcass away. In that case, this letter containing the secret manual of the arcane fire circuit that the Sun King had imparted to Kale, that was the key to Duque's true rise. It was not an exaggeration to say that without this handbook, Duque could have become an outstanding mage. However, it was only excellent. There was still a huge gap between the current transcendents, who could easily defeat mages of the same level or higher. Duque secretly compared it to other mages. Even those legendary mages like Krasis and Kel, Thizad, his arcane fire magic circuit, was not inferior. What did he rely on? Wasn't it just Aurelia's seemingly unintentional gift? It was hard for Duque to say what kind of attitude and feelings he had towards Aurelia. But Duque definitely knew one thing that couldn't be erased. Aurelia was definitely his benefactor. Now that Aurelia was in jail because of him, Duque almost went mad with anger. Cervantes did not seem to see Duke's reaction and continued to tell his story in one breath. Queen Sylvanas, who was proud in front of the world in later generations, was now telling a slightly sad story in the tone of a little girl next door. Originally, it was purely an accident that this handbook fell into elder sister's hands. But elder sister didn't know that third sister, Sasha, had signed an agreement that forbade this handbook from being circulated to anyone outside the Windrunner family. Violators would be severely punished. Sasha forgot to tell elder sister about this. She only told elder sister to return this handbook to Prince Kale. That's when she passed by the Dalajan. In fact, the prince wouldn't use this handbook. However, due to his adherence to the confidentiality of magic, the prince, who didn't receive the handbook, reported this matter to the kingdom. Later, this matter alarmed His Majesty, Sun King Anastrian. Originally, it wouldn't have been a problem even if an apprentice's handbook was lost. Even if there was a problem with the power of the Windrunner family, it could be easily settled. The problem was that this handbook contained the secret of the Sunstrider royal family's arcane magic circuit. If this secret hadn't been cracked and used, elder sister would still be fine. The problem was that there was a human youth who obtained this handbook and discovered this secret. He even used the arcane spell circuit training tutorial in this handbook to complete the basic construction of the arcane fire magic circuit in one step. If this youth was an ordinary person, as long as the Kuel Salus royal family sent a spellbreaker troop to destroy his magic circuit and stop the leakage of magic, then everything would be fine. Unfortunately, when this matter was discovered, the youth had already become an important minister of a human kingdom. After all, this matter was the High Elves' own fault. Moreover, the Sun King's secret possession of the magic circuit construction aroused strong dissatisfaction from the Silver Moon Council. So in the end, elder sister was only sentenced to 3 months of imprisonment in the Black Prison. Perhaps you will think that 3 months is not long, but for the Windrunner who loves freedom and is naturally undisciplined, this is more painful than the death penalty. Elder sister wouldn't let any of us sisters tell you. But I still couldn't help it because not long after elder sister came out, she asked about you again. When she heard about your deeds and that you became the Alliance's deputy commander, elder sister, who originally planned to come alone, used all her connections and mobilized the entire Windrunner family's elites to help. I don't know why elder sister did this. But I only know that you owe elder sister a lot of favors. I once suspected that you were elder sister's lover in the human world, so I tested you when I got off the ship. At this point, Sylvanas shrugged a little dejectedly. Well, I still don't know what the relationship between you two is, but if you harm elder sister again, this time it will be the other 3 sisters who won't let you go. After a long sigh, Duque opened his mouth. To Queen Sylvanas' surprise, Duque did not promise any compensation, nor did he make any oath. He just said something without rhyme or reason. Time will eventually prove that I am lucky to know Aurelia. It is the Windrunner's luck that Aurelia knows me. Sylvanas tilted her head curiously, and then her figure flashed and disappeared into the gradually darkening sky. The room fell into silence again. After a long time, Duque suddenly said, "Sister Aurelia, shall we go out for a walk?" The forest 30 meters behind the wooden house was also dead silent. After a full 10 seconds, a faint response came from the forest. "Okay." As the night fell, Duque and Aurelia walked side by side in a forest far away from the refugee camp and the military camp. Chapter 243. The woods were quiet. Apart from the chirping of insects and birds, there wasn't even the roar of large beasts. There might have been beasts before this year, but since the arrival of a large number of refugees and the repeated sweeps of locust-like hunters, there were only small beasts left in the forest of the Hillsbrad Hills. The two walked side by side for a long time without saying a word. The atmosphere was quiet and a little awkward. Especially Aurelia, she began to panic a little. After a year, Duque had undergone an earth-shattering transformation. She heard that the curse made him a little older, but she didn't expect that he had changed from a 15-year-old boy to a handsome young man. In the past, she could look down on Duque with her tall figure, satisfying her impression of a big sister. Now, because of Duque's growth, even when she walked with Duque, she felt like lovers? Originally, she was just curious about Duque, because a 15-year-old human male was no different from a baby in Aurelia's eyes. So, Aurelia could tease Duque and make fun of Duque. But in just a year, Duque's change was so great that Aurelia was tongue-tied. Regardless of whether it was in terms of physical growth, strength, or status, it was all in terms of growth. This Duque was completely unfamiliar to her. But Duque seemed to know her very well and had prepared everything for her, which made her feel extremely warm. Not only was Aurelia confused, but Duque was also confused. After thinking for a long time, Aurelia spoke first. Actually, you don't have to care about me being in prison. I should say that I'm just in solitary confinement. I'm also treated well in prison. When you grow up, you will understand that everyone has to be responsible for what they do. Although I was punished for my mistakes, it has nothing to do with you. Don't feel like you owe me anything. Duque smiled faintly. I don't think the kings of the 7 human kingdoms are stupid enough to let a child be the deputy commander of the alliance. Aurelia was choked by Duque. Aurelia suddenly became angry. She had been imprisoned for 3 months for this brat, and this brat was actually showing off. Aurelia reached out and wanted to knock Duque's head. Duque's bright eyes made Aurelia's movements stop. Aurelia, from the moment Cervantes told me about this, I've been wondering if I should do something to make it up to you. But I realized that if I did that, it would only make you feel worse, and it would also make you look down on me. Aurelia blinked her big green eyes as if saying, "How did you know? Not only do you have a sense of responsibility, but you are also a person with a sense of justice and fairness. You will feel that it is your responsibility. Even if I have a vested interest, I should not be responsible for your mistakes. Right?" Aurelia took a deep breath. "That's right." Duque screamed in his heart, "That's why you will become the heroine of later generations, the heroine whose statue is placed in Storm City's King's Valley, admired by all the citizens of Storm City and everyone who comes to King's Valley." A kind of excitement surged in Duque's heart. "The reason why you mobilized the Windrunner family to send out troops is not because I am the deputy commander, but because on one hand, you discovered that the situation on the continent is deteriorating rapidly. On the other hand, you think that with my help, you have more confidence in letting your people play a better role in this war. Because you have also carefully studied everything I have done in the past year, right?" Duque's words went straight to the bottom of Aurelia's heart. She didn't know when it started, but Aurelia's eyes were a little red. That was the feeling of relief that came from finally being recognized for everything she had done. In the end, she nodded heavily. At this time, Duque suddenly reached out to grab Aurelia's arms. Aurelia was stunned for a moment, but in the end, she didn't resist. Duque stared into the clear eyes of this beautiful elven ranger. "Straighten your chest, Sister Aurelia. Because of the letter you sent, Storm City had a once-in-a-century magic genius. This genius relied on this circuit to support Karazhan in the battle to kill his way to Sargeras. Because of your letter, Storm City had a great mage who was good at using flames. He burned hundreds of thousands of orcs. And because of your letter, this genius young mage created a giant ice block and saved 50,000 elite Stormwind warriors who had no hope of escaping. In the end, because of your letter, a new legend was created, and this legend continues to write the legend of him and Aurelia Windrunner as the deputy commander of the Alliance. With your momentary sacrifice, you cultivated a child of destiny who changed the history of the entire continent, and even the fate of all intelligent creatures on the planet. Sister, will you feel better if I say this?" Duque's words were like enlightenment, and it suddenly made Aurelia wake up. Aurelia's eyes were filled with that almost untamed wildness again. "Oh, why didn't I realize before that you are so good at talking, kid? In that case, my 3 months in the little black room were not in vain. It seems that I should consider giving you a trophy or something." Duque smiled. "That's good. Stop being so smug. I spent 3 months in a little black room with no fun places to go and no books. That's not a small price to pay. Kid, are you ready to be my servant?" I've been very busy recently. I probably have to work for someone, and it might be 100 years later," Duque said seriously. "Bastard. No one can renege on a debt to me, Aurelia Windrunner. No one. Aurelia pretended to roar and choked Duque's neck. As a man, he will definitely not owe anything. Oh, that's it? Aurelia suddenly remembered something. We sisters look quite similar, and you humans all look the same to us high elves. How did you tell us apart? Luckily, you did, or else I really wouldn't be able to defend myself. Duque remained silent, because everything he said could be used as evidence in court. Yes, if he confessed, he would be severely punished. If he resisted, he would be lenient, and he would go home for the new year. Unfortunately, Duque only controlled his mouth, but forgot to control his eyes. He unconsciously glanced at Aurelia's cleavage. With just one glance, Duque was in trouble. Aurelia suddenly realized that this little bastard could tell them apart based on the weight of the Meat Mountain Demon King. You bastard, slap. A crisp slap came from the forest, startling countless birds. Chapter 244. The mighty Sea King, Sky Wizard, and Alliance Deputy Commander Duke Marcus was in a small wooden hut, nursing his wounds. Sir, you have no self-respect. There is no need for you to accommodate that wild woman from Kuel Salis. As a powerful wizard who deserves the most perfect protection, as an important minister of Stormwind, as one of the most important figures in the Alliance, you should consider finding a suitable noble lady to marry, instead of running to those wild women who jump around in the forest all day and getting beaten up. Gavinrad was using holy light to treat Duque's wounds. Duque grimaced, but did not refute Gavinrad's words. This did not mean that Duque approved of it. It was just that it was useless to say anything. Gavinrad Misfortune, as the most capable of fighting among the new generation of Stormwind City nobles, was forced by Lothar to attend Archbishop Fael's ceremony and became one of the 7 Holy Knights. Unfortunately, among the 7 Holy Knights, Gavinrad's strength was only above the weakest Windsor, and even below Bolvar, whom Duque had forced in. As one of the 5 Holy Knights in history, Gavinrad also had the least presence. In the later Battle of Endoril, Gavinrad died at the hands of Arthas, who had turned into a Death Knight. It was not that Gavinrad was weak. In terms of strength, if the strongest Uther was defined as the maximum value of 100, then Gavinrad would be around 82. It was probably at an excellent level. The main reason was that the other Holy Knights were too arrogant. His natural strength was not off the charts, coupled with a large amount of aristocratic thinking and a lack of devotion to the holy light. His performance in history was not outstanding enough. As a guard, his performance was enough to make Duque feel at ease. Even though he knew that Gavinrad was doing it for Duque's own good, sometimes some words were very harsh, such as, "Sir Marcus, if you need to vent, I would suggest that you..." Gavinrad glanced at Vanessa, and then said in a deadpan manner, "Find a maid, such as Vanessa, that would be good. After all, she is one of us," and Vanessa's embarrassment turned into anger. She used shadow steps to flash behind Gavinrad and used backstab. However, paladins were like cockroaches that couldn't be killed. Moreover, Vanessa's training was far from perfect. To everyone's surprise, Gavinrad turned around and punched Vanessa and her dagger away with a fist that was glowing with holy light. Oh, it's fine if Vanessa doesn't want to. However, my first teacher back then was my maid. Even today, when I wasn't married, she was still my lover. My lord, you should understand that marriage between nobles is very prudent. On the other side, little Vanessa roared, "Asshole, I won't let you off." "Hey, Vanessa is my maid." "Of course, sir. I'll try my best not to hurt her." As he spoke, Gavinrad sent Vanessa flying with another punch. All right. I know which family I'm going to marry. Don't talk about this anymore." "Understood, my lord." Apart from thinking like a noble, Gavinrad was also an excellent paladin. However, that was all. Duque would send Windsor to help him control the Marcus family's private army, but he would not let Gavinrad go. In the following days, the relationship between Duque and Aurelia. How should it be said? It should be normalized. Things would go as they should. They would not be overly intimate, nor would there be any so-called estrangement. The two got along naturally. The only problem was that Aurelia still often treated Duque as a child. Lothar also teased Duque from time to time, saying that he had occupied the two most beautiful elven rangers, but could not eat either of them. Time entered November 11th. Lothar found that there was nothing that could make him laugh. The Griffin sentries stationed near the wetlands, near the mountains around Iron Stove Castle, had returned, almost as corpses. In order to ambush them, the Horde had sent out a large number of search teams. Proudmoore's ship had also returned. And Duque's Naga scouts. They all brought the same bad news. The Horde had seized more than 90% of the land of the dwarf kingdom of Cosmoden, and began to use the dwarven mines to build their own ships. Unlike the wooden transport ships before, the ships were large and rough iron ships. They were very clumsy, but they could carry thousands of orcs in their cabins. These ships would quickly carry the Horde across the water. Their target was obviously South Shore, or to be precise, the west coast of South Shore. Because these days, there had been countless Horde scouting boats trying to pass through the Naga and Murlocs to investigate the movement on the west coast. South Shore, on the other hand, did not have a single Horde scouting boat. It was completely like an abandoned target. It seemed that if the Horde successfully landed on the west coast of Hillsbrad, they would be at the midpoint between here and Gilneas, not far from the territories of Gilneas, Dalagen, and Alterac. Then the Horde would have the initiative, and the orcs could attack in any direction. If the Alliance could move quickly, they could wait for the Horde to arrive and fight them head-on. Gather the army. Lothar roared, abandon everything we don't need. If we are alive, we can send people back later. Now, we just need to maintain speed. Let's go. Let's go. When his other adjutants were about to go out of the headquarters to gather their own troops, Lothar turned around and looked at Duque. The king stood next to him. Sorry, your South Shore defense line seems to be useless. The Horde has changed a great chief, and it feels much smarter. Lothar comforted the young Duque. Not only Lothar, but many others also gave Duque a comforting look. Everyone knew that Duque had spent an unimaginable amount of effort to build the South Shore defense line. As the representative of the elves, Aurelia also attended the meeting. She almost wanted to go up and comfort Duque. At this moment, Duque suddenly spoke. General Lothar, do you want the few elites of the Alliance to fight against the Horde in the open wilderness? Lothar looked a little unhappy. What else can we do? We can't control where the Horde will land. We can't set up a long defense line along the entire Hillsbrad coastline at this time. If the Horde lands on the west coast, they will directly bypass your defense line in the direction of the sea in South Shore, and all the Alliance troops will be surrounded and annihilated in South Shore. Lothar was half explaining and half commanding to Duke as a senior tactician. At this time, he and Aurelia both saw the corner of Duque's mouth raised. Then let the Horde come to South Shore themselves to die. Duque snapped his fingers, and Windsor immediately understood. He walked out of the command post and waved 2 red flags high. Then the next moment, countless forts suddenly appeared on the hills in the distance where there was only green. Lothar and the others were stunned. Chapter 245. That's impossible. One by one, the green trees fell to the ground, revealing the behemoths behind them. They were grayish-white fortresses of varying heights, some with 2 floors, some with 4, and some with 5 floors. They followed the winding terrain of the hills by the beach, extending all the way to the horizon. How many fortresses were there? It was as if Duque had captured all the stonemasons and carpenters in the world overnight and made them work for 100 years in an instant. King Terinas and the others were not familiar with Duke. Even Leon and Lothar, who had witnessed the miracle of cement, were confused. When did Duke get so much cement? When did he organize the craftsmen to make so many fortresses? He had practically fortified the entire coastline. Not only the leaders in the command center, but even the soldiers who passed by the mountain could not help but point at the things on the mountain. Seeing Duke conjuring up so many bunkers like magic, everyone in the command post felt a sense of reverence as if they were worshipping a ghost or a god. Are all these real? Lothar could not even speak properly. Fake. Most of them. Duke shrugged his shoulders and shrugged. Also, spreading the troops evenly across a long defensive line is the work of a fool. I don't want to do such a thing. Then, Duque raised his chin and waved at Windsor. Two of Duque's private soldiers carried a fortress over. The leaders in the command center were stunned again. That's right, two people carrying a fortress that weighed who knew how many tons. Finally, a sharp-eyed fellow saw the problem. It was the color of wood. Wait, this so-called fortress is all made of wood? King Salas of Stormguard could not help but ask. Duque smiled in a self-righteous manner. Of course, in the eyes of the other kings, it was a sneaky smile. To be precise, most of it is made of very thin planks with a wooden frame. Don't worry, it's very sturdy. Unless there's a strong gust of wind for more than a day, it won't break. A group of big shots walked out of the command center and looked at the bunker again and again. They could not help but praise Duque's wonderful idea. At first glance, it looked like a complete house, but in fact, all the materials used were minimized. The inside was filled with wooden planks and strips, and the outside was smeared with lime and mud, making it look like a blockhouse made of bricks and wood. If one were to look at it from afar, no one would be able to tell that it was just for show. Not to mention ballistae and cannonballs, even an arrow would be able to pierce through this thing. The problem was, if so many of them were placed on the hill, it would be very tall. It was a steel line of defense. Duque clapped his hands. All right, I've arranged for the javelin throwers to be stationed at the key points. Next, I'll have to trouble Aurelia to send half of her rangers to defend the key points. Together with Admiral Dalen's patrol ships and my mere people, there should be no loopholes. General Dylin was obviously delighted. Aurelia, on the other hand, rolled her eyes at Duque flirtatiously. The flirtatious look was fake. The main thing was that Aurelia remembered how Duque had tricked her into tracking him. Those eyes were clearly saying, "Little thief, you're the most cunning of all." Of course, it was a different matter from how others saw it. King Alterac Eden muttered unhappily, "Didn't you say that the tribe changed to a new chief? Is this guy smarter than before? Will he fall for it?" This was indeed a problem. But it was not a problem for Duque. After the demonstration, everyone returned to the command center. In fact, this new great chieftain has always been my and Lothar's old rival. Duque laughed heartily as he looked at Lothar. Black Hand is just a brute. All his previous strategies were the ideas of his deputy, the current chief, Orgrim. If you pay attention, you'll find that this guy's fighting style is actually the same as his opponent's sudden inspiration in the Elven Forest. Lothar rubbed his chin as he recalled the past. Yes, I'm also curious about the enemy's commander. He can fight head-on and has strategies and tactics. I thought he was an enemy with a strong sense of the big picture. I had my doubts for a long time after killing Black Hand. Such a smart guy shouldn't have challenged me to a duel. Hey, you haven't answered my question yet. King Eden was very unhappy. Why do you think he'll definitely send the tribe to their deaths at South Shore, where we have the best defense? Based on the fact that I understand my enemy. Based on the fact that they will think, since we are going to attack by force anyway, we might as well attack the place with the best landing conditions. Duke purposely paused for a moment. There must be people who are not convinced by my words, right? Humph. King Eden snorted coldly. Duke raised his right hand and pointed his thumb at the huge block of ice that was placed next to the window of the command center. During the previous alliance meeting, some people questioned whether that ugly head belonged to the tribe's chief. Now we can try it. If the tribe really refuses to come, we'll hang the head at the gate of South Shore and raise the war flag we stole. We'll know whether these two things are real or fake once we try them. When Duque said this, Lothar's eyes lit up astonishingly. Lang even clapped his hands in amazement. Good. If the old king of a country was killed on the battlefield and even his head was cut off, what was the easiest way for the new king to establish his authority? Wasn't it just to kill the old king's enemy and clear his name? It could also boost the morale of the people. The same logic applied to the tribes that were more courageous and valued individual strength more. Antonidas stroked his long white beard. Are we going to hang the chief's head from the start? No. Duque shook his right index finger. That's too wasteful. I'm very confident that Orgrim will attack South Shore. This move is just a safety measure, or it can only be used when forcing the tribe to bleed. Force the tribe to bleed. How ruthless. The kings could already imagine how the tribe would feel when they found out that South Shore was a super tough nut to crack and was about to retreat but had to continue sending troops to deal with this death trap. That wasn't all. Duque drew a line on the map. As long as the tribe can't cross the sea through the shortest route, they'll have to make a big detour no matter if they go west or east. By then, Dalen your fleet, Ken? If the tribe went around South Shore through the wetlands, it would be hundreds or even thousands of nautical miles no matter which way they went. If Dalen's fleet couldn't even handle the transport ships that wouldn't resist, they might as well sink themselves. Chapter 246. The entire command center echoed with King Dalen's laughter. It was definitely a good sign on the eve of a great war. Everyone knew that the Horde was powerful. The depressed atmosphere in the command center had also spread to the middle-level commanders. The Horde's change of tactics made the Alliance, who already had the upper hand, feel that their morale had dropped by 30% before the war even started. They did not know that the Battle of Hillsbrad on the west coast had indeed happened in history. The Alliance had paid a heavy price for the victory. Ha! I will let those damn greenskins see what the sea wolves of Cultivate are like. The long sea route is enough for my boys to send them all to the bottom of the sea to feed the fish. Dalen Proudmoore laughed happily. He was so happy that he kept patting Duque's shoulder. Yo, Duque, you really don't want to consider my Jaina? She's only 3 years younger than you. She can get married in a few years. Duque seemed to have sensed Aurelia's murderous intent. He shrunk his neck. No. Thanks. I won't consider marriage for the time being. Actually, Aurelia did not have much of a reaction. However, when Duque glanced at her guiltily, everyone felt that there was definitely something going on between her and Duque. Aurelia was furious. If they were not in the Alliance command center, if Servanas did not secretly pull her back, the Demon King might have gone crazy. However, at this time, Aurelia could only pretend that nothing had happened. She smiled elegantly and looked out of the window as if there was an opera in the air. God, you're so blue. Aurelia felt that she was an idiot. It's all that little bastard's fault. Behind Aurelia, the second sister of the Windrunner family covered her mouth and snickered. Okay, gentlemen. Lothar clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention. Thank you, Mr. Marcus, for your brilliant plan. Let's make some changes to the battle plan. Everyone has seen South Shore's defensive line. I don't think we need all of our troops to defend South Shore. We can mobilize a considerable portion of our mobile forces to prevent the Horde from attacking the west coast. The military meeting continued. South of the sea. Half a day later, Chief Orgrim Doomhammer received a shocking piece of news in the main tent of the wetland tribe. The Alliance had fortified the entire coastline. What's the problem? As long as there was enough space to spread out, the weak humans were useless. Great Chief, if you're afraid, you can let me, Red Mafia, play forward. Rend Blackhand, the foolish son of the former Great Chief Blackhand. He and his brother Mame had always believed that Orgrim had killed his father in a despicable manner and then ascended to the position of High Chieftain. Orgrim really wanted to kill these two brats. Unfortunately, Orgrim couldn't do it. After the battle at Stormwind City, the Blackrock tribe had lost too many of their elites. At this time, his son would undoubtedly cause the already weakened Blackrock tribe to split again. Orgrim didn't want to see this happen. This would cause the Blackrock tribe to lose control of the tribe. The wily Orgrim was waiting patiently. Enough. The humans have become more cunning than before. The era of one beastman warrior fighting 10 human warriors is over. Even if I don't want to admit it, I have to admit that the humans fought very well under the cover of the bunkers. I don't want to waste the lives of the tribe's warriors. Do you want my Warsong tribe to take the lead? Grom Hellscream roared as he walked over with his famous blood howl. Great Chief, do you think those bunkers are fake? At this time, an unwelcome figure appeared. The warlock Orgrim couldn't hide his disgust. In the end, he didn't kill Ghoul Dan. After clearing out 70% of the Shadow Council's warlocks, Orgrim's soldiers controlled the remaining warlocks and Ghoul Dan, who had just woken up. If Orgrim didn't need Ghoul Dan's warlocks to fight against the human mages, if Ghoul Dan didn't offer up those damned monsters when the tribe needed new soldiers, Orgrim might have really killed Ghoul Dan. When Ghoul Dan woke up again, his strength was much weaker. When Medivh died, he let his soul sneak into Medivh's sea of consciousness to steal something. In the end, Duque stabbed Medivh in the chest, causing Ghoul Dan to suffer. Dan lost half of his soul because of this. After waking up, in order to survive, Ghoul Dan submitted to Orgrim. No matter how much Orgrim hated Ghoul Dan for murdering his good friend Durotan, he had to admit that Ghoul Dan was the only one who could help him in terms of strategy among these tribal leaders whose brains were all muscles. I think it's fake, but I'm not sure. The humans have a way to build a sturdy fortress in a short period of time. I personally went to see it. 3 days ago, there was nothing there. 3 days later, there was a fortress that couldn't be destroyed even with a catapult. It was obvious that Duke's cement had caused Orgrim to misjudge the situation. The power of a transmigrator was evident. Ghoul Dan laughed evilly. Won't we know if we test it out? I can have one of my warlocks follow your scouting ship. But after returning to South Shore, Duque was tricked. On a journey to the furthest point of the west coast, Aurelia seemed to have done something to Duque's horse. Duque's horse seemed to have entered heat, jumping around Aurelia's horse. Duque's bones were about to fall apart. On the way up the hill, Aurelia tricked Duque again. Oh, so it's like that. This is the place where my rangers will be stationed. It didn't sound like a problem, but anyone would have a mental breakdown if they were constantly being whispered into their ears. It was like a ghost. Even though this wasn't surprising at all. After Aurelia's arrival, Duque understood how quickly and quietly Aurelia could appear and disappear. Aurelia would often suddenly speak into Duque's ears when he wasn't aware. It seemed intimate, but it was just to scare him. And it seemed like the Demon King was enjoying it. At first, Gavin Rad tried to stop this. Firstly, Duque didn't let him chase Aurelia away. Secondly, speed wasn't a paladin's forte. Thirdly, he was powerless to stop it. In the end, Gavin Rad obediently became a third wheel. Chapter 247. Standing on a hill at the westernmost point of the western coast and looking south, the huge Atonement Island, the island called Tobalad, was on the right side of the horizon. It was a spiral-shaped island with a huge fortress at the highest point. On the shore of the island, the newly transferred Kurtira's 4th Fleet was stationed there. Duque, are you kidding me? I don't think those green-skinned creatures would be stupid enough to attack here. Aurelia gently placed her hands on her hips. Following the direction of her hands, one could see the sexy mermaid lines of this beautiful ranger. For some reason, Duque suddenly found that he could not look at Aurelia directly recently. Aurelia glared at Duque, reminding him that this was a time of war. Unfortunately, Aurelia also found that she could not look at Duque directly recently. Even if she kept telling herself that Duque was just a 15-year-old kid, she still couldn't believe it. But he did not look like a kid. Alright, back to the main topic. The place they were at was very delicate. From the topography of the mountains, there were towering mountains to the west. Even the beastmen would find it extremely difficult to climb up the steep cliffs of almost 90 degrees. This was definitely a nightmare for an army to disembark. The hill they were standing on had a slope of about 45 degrees, all the way to the beach. It could be said that this was the limit for an army to disembark. Aurelia did not think that the horde would probe here, mainly because they were too close to Kurtira's 4th Fleet. Even if the 4th Fleet was weaker and only had half the number of the first 3 fleets, it was still not something that the horde's transport ships or reconnaissance ships could contend against. No. Aurelia, have you noticed that the geographical position here is very delicate? It happens to be within range of the island's cannons. The female elf stroked her gorgeous blonde hair. She noticed that the island was a little far away. If they passed through the side of the island, because of the protruding mountains on the west side, there would be a blind spot that long-range weapons could not reach. If they broke through here, the cannons on the island would not be able to reach them. But here, Duque had actually built a huge bunker. A 5-story blockhouse was built here using cement mixed with newly arrived volcanic limestone. The lowest level had a total of 8 cannons, and the second level had 12 ballistae. There were also catapults on both sides of the blockhouse. This configuration was almost comparable to South Shore. I want you to destroy all the scouts of the tribe in the shortest time possible. I can only leave this task to you, Aurelia, Duque said with bright eyes. The female elf was obviously snubbed. She put her hands on her waist and felt as if there was an invisible tail on her butt. You seem to know quite well who is the strongest woman in the Windrunner family. Duque face-bombed, sweating profusely. On the way, Duque arranged for Sylvanas to guard a blockhouse midway between South Shore and this place. In Aurelia's opinion, that was the most likely place to be tested. Because of this, Aurelia threw a tantrum for a long time. Now that the great demon king was satisfied, she let him go. Aurelia, who was ready for battle, felt that Duque was a hindrance. She said that he, as the deputy commander, did not need to worry about the specific layout of the battlefield and sent Duque away. Duque had thought that this was the end, but on the way back to South Shore he saw two long legs dangling in the air. The green boots hanging in the air were really eye-catching. Coupled with the long legs that were definitely more than 10 meters long, it was hard not to see them. Elves were slender to begin with, and Queen Sylvanas' long legs were even more exaggerated. Not to mention the extra fat, it was a perfect beauty that would have been too plump if there was more, but too skinny if there was less. Duque, Gavin Rad, Windsor, and Duque's guards stopped their horses. Sylvanas, what's the matter? Queen Sylvanas' legs swayed as if she was kicking the water, and there was an intoxicating laziness in her expression. Nothing, I just feel that. Are you looking down on me? It seems like you gave me the most likely place to find orc scouting ships, but in fact, you think that my sister's place is the key, right? This intuition, the Windrunner sisters are all monsters. Duque sighed. Yes, I have to admit, in my mind, the probability of that is 5 times higher. Why did you arrange it this way? Queen Sylvanas asked casually. Because you don't look motivated? Duque decided to play dumb. Everyone knows that you are a famous salary thief in Cuel Salis. You get the benefits of a ranger general, but you don't do any proper work. Of course, this was just a facade. The main reason was the suppression of the Silver Moon Council, or rather, the suppression of the High Elves mages on the entire ranger faction. The mages who mastered magic were the rulers, but the rulers also needed more ordinary warriors to maintain the pyramid structure of the ruling class, so they always suppressed the ranger faction. Moreover, the High Elves were originally exiled by the Druid faction, the dominant Night Elves, because they had different opinions on the use of magic. Therefore, the mages had been suppressing the more natural ranger faction for thousands of years. Unable to accept the excellence of the 3 Windrunner sisters, the Silver Moon Council only promoted Sylvanas to the rank of Ranger General because of her undeniable military achievements. But this was the limit. The Silver Moon Council had been making things difficult for Sylvanas and suppressing him in almost every way. If the Hindustani family lost a cat, they would ask her to look for it, but if there was a big incident like an arcane puppet going berserk, she would not be involved. This was for the sake of political balance and also a compromise. Sylvanas had the title of Town Security of Cuel Salis, the General of the City Guards, and could not do anything at all. Don't look down on the women of the Windrunner family. Any one of us 4 sisters has killed 3-digit trolls, Sylvanas complained. Strangely, Duque found that Queen Sylvanas had entered a serious mode. Most of the women of the Windrunner family had a lively and curious side to them. If they ignored their innate desire for battle because of this side of their personality, someone would definitely pay a terrible price. Duque quickly drew a cross on his chest with an invisible hand of the soul and secretly said, Namo Amitba and Amitba Buddha, then put on a face that showed that he valued Queen Sylvanas very much. I believe so too. Since you have spoken, then fine, I will prepare a special seat for you in South Shore in 3 days. There will be prey that you will be satisfied with, Duque promised. That's more like it. Sylvanas' figure suddenly disappeared from the big tree trunk. Chapter 248. The next moment, Sylvanas suddenly appeared behind Duque, who was riding on horseback. It looked like the two of them were riding on the same horse, incomparably intimate. In reality, Queen Sylvanas did not put any weight on the horse at all. She was so light that he could not feel any weight at all. Her hands pressed lightly on Duque's shoulders, and she came up from Duque's right back. A strange, natural fragrance gently brushed past Duque's ear, making Duque's heart itch. Then, Duque suddenly felt a strange touch on his right cheek. It was the touch of red lips. Unlike Aurelia's soft kiss last time, which was like kissing a child, this kiss felt between intimacy and warning. Between kiss and bite, there was a hint of a reward, but also a faint warning. Yo, the great lad that my sister has taken a fancy to. This is your reward in advance. But if you dare to break your promise, I will bite off a piece of your flesh in the same place. After the lightning kiss, Queen Sylvanas's warning came through the whisper of the wind. Duque touched the right side of his face, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Was this a warning? Or a reward? In any case, Duque was teased again. Sylvanas's green figure suddenly disappeared without a trace. She was ridiculously fast, and her graceful figure was also dazzling. On the other side, Gavin Rad chuckled unkindly. Hey, you're not qualified as a bodyguard. Duque complained. As long as you give the order to label Lady Aurelia or Lady Sylvanas as an enemy, my warhammer will definitely not hesitate to smash that beautiful face. Gavin Rad's face had a naughty look on it. The subtext was, do you dare, Duque? Duque would not do that even if he was out of his mind. That was Queen Sylvanas. If he could change history and save Queen Sylvanas, so that she would no longer be the cold undead queen, but a warm and lively Sylvanas, that would be perfect. Thinking of King Lang, who was still alive and kicking, Duque suddenly felt confident. However, could Sylvanas still be called Queen She if she did that? Duque suddenly felt a little melancholic. At this moment, Gavin Rad muttered softly, "Thank goodness you didn't take fourth brother as well. Otherwise, you would have become everyone's enemy." What? Duque was stunned for a moment and didn't pay attention. Oh, nothing. As expected, the tribe's probing came on the second day. It was a dusk raid. Almost 30 transport ships rushed out of the sea almost as night fell. Currently, the horde was indeed lacking in warships. The clever orcs had found another way to solve the problem of not having control over the sea. That was speed. It was unreasonably fast. It was insanely fast. This wasn't the latest metal lump, but an earlier batch made of pure wood. It was lighter and faster. The hull was ridiculously low. There was no mast, no tower, and no deck could be seen from the outside. The part above the sea was almost completely covered by defensive shells. The orc laborers covered the top of the ship with large shells for defense. What did the orc transport ships use as power? The answer was oiling. It was purely hand-powered, without any additives or preservatives. Oh, wrong, without any high-end navigation technology. There wasn't even a rudder. It relied entirely on paddles to change course. From a bird's-eye view, the entire ship looked like a cockroach gliding on the surface of the water. The orcs' navigation was simple and violent. What if the waves capsized the ship? What if they were not skilled enough to sail on the sea? Nothing. If they sank, so be it. Orcs who could not be used had no right to live. This was the orcs' philosophy of life. When 27 of the 30 transport ships broke away from the patrol fleet and rushed over, there was a huge commotion on Tobalad. It was only when the ships broke through the waves, completely ignoring the possibility of recycling them and rushed to the beach along with the surging tide, that the first meaningless roar of cannons rang out on Tobalad Island. The sky rapidly darkened. Looking from afar, most of the ships had reached the shore. Many black figures gathered together and stepped onto the stony beach. They didn't line up and charge towards the hill in a disorderly manner. Even from the hill, Aurelia could see these creatures with red eyes and green skin. They were tall and had no armor. They carried heavy weapons that could definitely be described as massive as they ran towards the hill. They brandished crude weapons such as axes, hammers, machetes, and spears. Many of them didn't have the glow of metal. And they had a lot of people. It was hard to imagine how more than 50 people could fit on those small transport ships that looked like they could only fit 20 people. 22 ships, more than 1,000 suicide squad members. Night attack. This was not a small amount of pressure for the regular human army. The High Elf Rangers were an exception. They didn't even need to observe the direction of the wind. The Windrunner sisters were the children of the wind. Aurelia raised her emerald green longbow and knocked 3 green arrows with her slender fingers. She didn't stop to recite a series of numbers. Wind southwest. Force 2. Elevation 3. Beside Illyria, Lilith's Windrunner, who had been silent all this while, shouted uncharacteristically. Wind southwest. Force 2. Elevation 3. Behind the Windrunner sisters, 500 elite rangers raised their longbows in silence. If it was a human archer unit, they might need a marksman to lead the shots. Everyone would shoot in the same direction. At least the landing point wouldn't be too ridiculous. The human archers played with blanket shooting. They relied on numbers and the density of arrows to kill in an area. What about the High Elf Rangers? Sorry, they were all F*King snipers. Aurelia's strong figure stood in the wind. The breeze blew her golden hair and her green cloak. She looked like a valiant female archer. 3 consecutive shots. Aurelia shouted. The bowstrings in the hands of these elite rangers, who were holding 2 or 3 arrows at the same time, were finally released. More than 1,200 arrows flew into the sky, striving to outdo each other. At the same time, Duque had specially arranged the fake goods to be shot. What the catapult threw out were all arrows without arrowheads or feathers. What Duke wanted was this feeling of being shot from all directions. It was for the beastmen in the observation ships to see. The real fatal ones were Aurelia's rangers. It was difficult for bows and arrows to deal a fatal blow to the strong orcs. This rule, that had been proven countless times, clearly only applied to human troops. For the High Elves, who were born with marksmanship and had night vision and telescopic eyes, the exposed throats and skulls of the orcs were simply huge targets. In the second round of 3 consecutive shots, the orcs attacking the beach were actually all wiped out. Chapter 249. Each of the orcs had 2 or 3 elven arrows stuck in their vitals. The most miserable orc had 4 arrows in his throat and 3 arrows in each of his eye sockets. There was almost no place for him to stick them in. Suddenly, there was a burst of mournful cries on the beach. The sound was so dense that it almost made people think that it was just one loud sound. A few seconds later, the beach was filled with the sound of the wind and waves, but there was no sound of people. Only the green shadows of the beach under the last rays of the setting sun, as well as the black sea under the dim light, were chasing the scouting ships. The orcs attacking the beach were completely wiped out. Silence. Dead silence. Not only were the orcs frightened, but the Kurtula's navy on the island were also dumbfounded. The navy had originally planned to approach the shore as much as possible and support the defenders on the shore with artillery fire. The rear admiral was prepared to accept the severe punishment of King Lin as the price for his defense line being broken under his eyes. But what happened? The orcs attacking the beach were killed in seconds? Just as the navy ships were unmoored and ready to go out to sea, they were all dead. What the hell was that? But that was not important. Even if the orcs on the shore were killed, there were still those on the sea. Looking at the orc scouting ships that turned around and wanted to leave, the Kurtula's 4th fleet chased them with all their might. Duke, who was watching the battle from the shore, was worried that the beastmen would be as pitiful as the orcs. They would be completely wiped out without even a messenger. In the end, when he saw that 2 scouting ships had escaped, Duque finally let out a long sigh of relief. Little rascal, are you satisfied now? On the top floor of the bunker, Aurelia carried her bow and looked at the relieved Duque with her hands on her hips. I'm satisfied, what about you? Duque asked casually. It's not even a warm-up. Us Windrunner family rangers, without the arm strength to shoot 100 arrows, are not qualified at all. Duque was dumbfounded. Are all the High Elves monsters? Drawing a bow and pulling an arrow looked easy. To shoot far, one had to use a strong bow. In the truest sense, a strong bow could not be drawn without a draw force of over 100 Gen. Even though the arrows could fly further with the help of the mountain, The Elven Ranger's sniping range was more than 100 meters. At this distance, if a professional human archer were to use a bow of this level, they would only be able to draw the bow 10 times at most before their arms would become sore and swollen. Aurelia actually said 100 arrows. Looking at those arms and legs that were more slender than a human's, it was hard to imagine that the muscles under the fair skin had such endurance. However, on Aurelia's smooth arm, there wasn't even a mouse muscle. It was completely streamlined. Duque shrugged. All right, I'm convinced. Seeing that there were no outsiders around, Aurelia came up to Duque and affectionately put her hand on his shoulder. Hey, I heard from my sister last night that you gave her a special class seat. Big sister went to jail for 3 months because of you. You can't be so biased, right? When Duque heard this, he was speechless. It was strange for two sisters to compete over this kind of thing. Aurelia went to jail for him for 3 months. This was definitely a big favor. Duque had been in Azeroth for a long time. Other than this, he really didn't feel that he owed anyone a big favor. Aurelia was the only one. All right, after the grudge in her heart was resolved, Aurelia didn't care about it anymore. In the end, such a big favor was casually used by Aurelia to ask for repayment. And it was this kind of unseemly repayment. Duque was so angry at Aurelia that he laughed and cried. Yes, he laughed and cried at the same time. All right, actually, I built a very sturdy hill behind the mayor's house in South Shore. There is a bunker on top of it. Yes, I know that little brother is good to me. Come, let big sister give you a kiss. Kiss where? Of course, on the forehead. Could it be anywhere else? But this time, there were no outsiders. Duque was able to enjoy the deep ravine between the two meat mountains. Shamefully, Duque's mind was shaken. At the same time, the middle bunker that Sylvanas was guarding was also being probed by the orcs. Their position was a little off from what was planned. It was unknown whether it was because of the tides or the current. Sylvanas led the rangers and sprinted for half a kilometer before they finally caught up with the orcs and attacked them head-on. It was also an instant kill. Unfortunately, there were only 2 boats that landed. Queen Sylvanas was not satisfied at all. Late at night the next day, Orgrim received a report from the returning scout ship. What? The humans have set up a large number of cannons, ballistae and archers along the coast? Orgrim could not believe his ears. Orgrim did not give up and asked every scout in detail. Great chief, it's true. I swear on the clan's flag. Less than 100 men away, and we were shot by many arrows. There were about 40 to 50 bundles. The orc scout's words were the orc version. It was about 300 meters long, and we were shot by 5,000 arrows. Where did the humans get so many archers? If it was true, then the human kingdoms in the northern continent were much stronger than those in the southern continent. In reality, the information that they received showed that there were 6 human kingdoms in the northern continent. Orgrim felt terrible. If they gave up on the Hillsbrad foothills, then the horde would have to go around the long sea route without any advantage in the sea. This was suicide. But the horde could not wait. After the main force left Stormwind, the horde realized that most of the southern continent did not have enough food to support the army. The dwarves' Asmodean kingdom was cold, and many plants in the wetlands were inedible. Large numbers of crocodiles and ferocious monsters caused a lot of trouble for the horde. Only the rich northern continent could provide them with hope. Orgrim hated Ghoul, Dan and the other warlocks. Under his instigation, the horde was like a swarm of locusts. No matter where they went, they quickly used up all the resources. All the trees were cut down, and the grass was uprooted. They either used it for themselves, or burned it for fun. This was not a joke. The orcs could not suppress the urge to destroy in their hearts. When there were no enemies, the orcs found it fun to destroy the environment. Without the pressure from the human mages, Orgrim might have really killed all those damned warlocks. But now, Orgrim could do nothing. The horde was like a wheel rolling down a mountain. It would either continue to roll, or it would flip over and be destroyed halfway up the mountain. There was no way to stop. Orgrim bared his teeth and pressed his thick reddish-brown finger on the coarse cowhide map. Since the humans have defenses all along, then let's pick the best place to land. His finger was pointing at the location of South Shore. Chapter 250. On the 18th of November, the famous Battle of South Shore, officially known as the Battle of Hillsbrad Hills, broke out. Unlike the previous battles between humans and orcs, where they lost in the field and were forced to defend passively in every large-scale defensive battle, this time, they successfully lured the enemy into the trap and entered the carefully selected battlefield of South Shore. Every alliance general was extraordinarily excited. The intelligence had come back. The Horde army had assembled on the ships, and according to the direction, their destination was South Shore. There was no way to lie about this. Duque's Naga could not possibly guard the coastline of hundreds of kilometers of wetlands without any loopholes. This was something that could not be guarded by any means in this era. The march of the army was different. When a large number of ships were pushed from the beach into the sea, the alliance generals knew that the war was coming. One day later, the orcs would come. Duque pressed his palm on the huge map in the command center and said loudly, "This time, the name of the battle is Orc Blood." Orc Blood? A simple and straightforward name. The proud soldiers and generals from the Seven Kingdoms all fell into a murmur as if they were possessed. Soon, an indescribable feeling of fear spread through their bodies and went straight to the deepest part of their minds. It shook violently, resonating with the armor on their bodies and the long swords in the scabbards at their waists. These experienced generals had a strange feeling at the same time. It was as if a magnificent illusion had appeared in front of their eyes. On the battlefield that had been burned to ashes, countless green-skinned corpses were strewn all over the place. Every corpse was so ferocious and cruel, but their unwilling souls could only continue to vent their anger by roaring in the desperate hell. The generals could not think of any other name more suitable for this battle after hearing the name Orc Blood from Duque's mouth. Even if this was not the final battle between the Alliance and the Horde, it was still very exciting to let the enemy's blood dry. They even felt that because of the name, the success of the battle was inevitable. Of course, this was just a momentary illusion. Not to mention the Stormwind Kingdom's army that had experienced the defense battle of Stormwind City, just by seeing with their own eyes that even the corpses of the orc laborers had the physiques of the strongest human soldiers. The generals of the Alliance knew that the road ahead would be extremely difficult. There was no such thing as a casual victory. Every victory, even with such an overwhelming advantage, had to go through several life-and-death ordeals. The expressions on their faces quickly changed from excitement to seriousness. However, it was undeniable that as useless martial artists in a peaceful era, hearing such a name for battle in a chaotic world that suddenly descended upon them would inevitably stir up the lofty sentiments lurking in their bodies. Their sharp eyes were still filled with excitement. What excited them the most was to take the first step towards strategic victory before they gained an advantage in terms of tactics. This was the great achievement of a super genius deputy commander who looked like he was 19 years old but was actually only 15 years old. In a sense, they were standing on the shoulders of giants. "Please let me, Haas's Eagle Knights, be the vanguard." "Stop joking. This is a defensive battle. Don't tell me your knights are going to charge into the sea. Let my torrential Fort Mountain infantry do it." Every general enthusiastically recommended themselves to Duque. Originally, the deployment of the army should have been done by Lothar, the commander-in-chief. Lothar, on the other hand, said that no one knew the South Shore defense line better than Duque himself, so it was best for him to arrange it. So he temporarily handed over the command of the army to Duque. Duque was not going to pass on this responsibility. He was very clear that this was likely to be the turning point between the Alliance and the Horde. Every army that appeared might go down in history because of this. However, Duque was extremely cautious. As a transmigrator, he knew that the Horde must have some cards. Even though the Horde had changed a lot, the few cards in the history were probably still there. First, General Proudmoore. Duque directly called out his rank. It was rare for King Dalen Proudmoore to stand at attention. Except for the 4th Fleet, which is cruising in the waters opposite the West Beach, all fleets set up pocket formations in the waters opposite South Shore. All light transport ships are to be sent over. Before we receive the signal, we must let go of 60% of the large transport ships with metal plates. Once we receive the signal, kill them at all costs. No problem. General Dalen was heroic. Duque turned his head and scanned the Alliance generals from left to right. Finally, his gaze landed on Mograine and Abendis. General Mograine, General Abendis, can I trust your Scarlet Crusade? The Scarlet Crusade will not retreat. Mograine roared domineeringly. On this obviously much younger face, Duque seemed to see the heroic image of him wielding the domineering semi-divine weapon, Ashbringer, to kill enemies in the future. Duque drew a line on the map. From the mountain to the west of South Shore, 5 kilometers to the west belongs to your army. I want you to defend the mountain to the death. Without the signal, no counterattack. Understood. In this era, army was a very general concept. A smaller army could only have 5 or 6,000 people. A bigger army, like Mograine's Scarlet Crusade, had nearly 30,000 people. The current Scarlet Crusade was far less crazy and twisted than in the future. They had excellent discipline and high morale. They were definitely the cream of the Lordaeron army. Duque sent them as the main defense force. King Tyrrhenus, who had been silent all this time, also had a proud expression on his face. Next, Duque looked at King Lang. General Rin. Duque was definitely strange, but in order to maintain the military system of the Alliance, he had to do this. Yes. The golden-armored Lang was also eager to prove himself. You and General Seamus will lead the Griffin Legion and the 1st and 2nd Stormwind Infantry Divisions to defend the mountain to the east of the town. Understood. To be honest, Lang was a little disappointed. It sounded like Mograine, but one on the left and one on the right of South Shore. In reality, the Stormwind had the advantage in terms of terrain. There was also a relatively rapid river to the east of South Shore. If they attacked from the mountain, it would be no different than having an extra moat. Lang also knew that Duque wanted him to attack, but also to preserve the strength of the Stormwind. Considering the overall situation, this was the safest arrangement. Lang did not say anything. General Lothar, lead all the cavalry and prepare to charge along the designated route. When the time comes, all the enemies that enter the town will be thrown into the sea to feed the fish. No problem. Lothar was also very excited. Chapter 251. The sun was setting. A bright sword was inserted into the hilltop. In the field of vision, the tip of the sword was stabbed into the slightly yellowed meadow. The sharp blade, which shone like a pool of autumn water, reflected the vast sea, while the hilt of the sword blended into the endless sky. It was as if the sword had pierced through the entire world. The blue ribbon on the hilt with the emblem of a lion's head fluttered in the breeze, and the swaying elegance reminded one of a distant memory. The wise and deep blue eyes were squinting slightly, greedily absorbing the scenery between heaven and earth into his pupils. The middle-aged man was wearing a blue lion's head cloak with golden edges. Under the cloak was a shiny golden helmet, which symbolized the glory of an era as well as the shame of an era. A pair of large hands that had only recently become rough touched the top of the sword hilt, holding the sharp sword. He stood upright in the wind like a stone statue. Your Majesty, it's getting late. Andoin, guess what I'm looking at? King Lang smiled and turned around to ask his childhood friend, the former leader of the Storm Knights, and the current commander-in-chief of the Alliance. After crossing the sea, head forward, then southwest, then southeast, where Stormwind City is. Lothar was indeed worthy of being Lang's best friend. He easily guessed Lang's thoughts. Stormwind City is the land that we once risked our lives to protect. It's also our glory. When I knew that Stormwind City could not be defended, I thought that my sword and I would be destroyed there. However, for the sake of Varian, I'm still standing here, looking at my sword in a foreign land. Lang pulled the sword out of the ground. The sharp and tough blade did not show the slightest bit of damage even though it had been through such rough treatment. Lang raised the tip of the sword to the sky and stared at it quietly. A timid voice came from behind Lang and Lothar. Father, are you saying that I've tarnished your glory? No, it's not like that, Varian. True glory is never a person or a person's private property. Lang retracted his gaze. The storm golden sword that symbolized royal power and glory looked extremely slender and sturdy in the setting sun. It was as if the sword was supporting a part of the world. Lang sheathed the sword and walked over to his lover and child. The queen gave Varian a gentle push, allowing the young Varian to step forward. Lang caressed Varian's head lovingly. His loving gaze seemed to have traveled through time. 1,000 years ago, when the last son of Thoradin the Great was abandoned in the ruins of the Torrent Castle by the arrogant nobles who were eager to go to the rich land of Lordaeron. The late king of Stormwind brought his son and led the abandoned poor people across half of the continent to the valley where Stormwind City is now. The late king made a vow. I swear to protect my people, to keep them away from hunger and cold, to keep them away from killing and strife, and to keep them away from the arrogance and greed of the nobles. Lang's voice was deep, but there was a strange sense of emptiness that made everyone feel as if they had traveled through time with his voice. The late king did it. He forged the glory of Stormwind in his own way. He also used his own way to tell the later generations what glory was. Before he died, he also issued an imperial order for every noble in the new kingdom to follow the spirit of chivalry, to be humble and devout, full of glory, not afraid of sacrifice, brave and resolute, compassionate and honest. That was how Stormwind came to be founded, with military might and the tradition of inheriting titles through military merit. It's a pity that most of the nobles in Stormwind have forgotten all of this. Hence, I'm more willing to see the fall of Stormwind City as a punishment from our ancestors for losing our glory. The young William nodded as if he understood. Fortunately, when the people of Stormwind were at their most desperate, I still had your uncle Anduin and the unparalleled genius Duque to help me. This gave me the opportunity to make up for my mistake and recover the lost glory of the kingdom. My personal glory is no longer important. My only hope is that the descendants of Orion will not forget their original intention and pass on the glory of the late king. As long as I can do it, I won't have any regrets even if I die. Father, you will. You will see the day when Stormwind City is restored, William said with absolute certainty. I hope so too. However, your Uncle Duque and I will eventually grow old. When that time comes, it will depend on your and Brother Duque's hard work. The young prince nodded vigorously. Looking at the sea, Lang's vision seemed to penetrate the horizon and reach the huge transport fleet that was traveling at high speed on the sea. It all depends on tomorrow. Don't worry, there's you, there's me, there's Duque. Whether it's Stormwind City or the Alliance, we are invincible. No one would have thought that just a day ago, at the wetland, at the gathering of hundreds of thousands of orcs, someone would say something that was almost the same. Orgrim Doomhammer stood on a high hill. In his vision, hundreds of thousands of orcs stepped on the muddy ground. There were so many beastmen that it looked like a bright green ocean as far as the eye could see. This ocean breathed together, enjoyed the victory together, and enjoyed the same fate. Every orc was looking forward to Orgrim's speech. In the eyes of the orcs, even though there was still the last iron furnace fort that had not been conquered, everyone believed that it was only a matter of time before Kilrog Deadeye's Bloodring clan dragged those damned dwarves out of the cave and killed them. They had completely conquered this continent. Although there was better prey and more fertile land here than in their homeland, it was still far from enough to accommodate all the clans. In the eyes of the orcs, this was only enough for 3 large clans to thrive. But how could there only be 3 large clans? Orgrim laughed. Then he raised his famous Doomhammer up high and roared towards the sky. My people, listen to me. The commotion below disappeared. Every orc quietened down and turned their ugly faces full of protruding fangs towards Orgrim. This world is very suitable for survival. We can rebuild our homeland here. And we have already conquered this land. This is the victory of the Horde. This is the victory of the orcs. Suddenly, a burst of earth-shattering cheers erupted from below. Orgrim could only wait for the cheers to die down before he continued. But this is not enough. Humans are not as weak as we thought. They are very good at learning and have many tricks up their sleeves. Every time they lose, they will become stronger to deal with our axes and hammers. Even though we have chased them out of this continent, They are still trying very hard to take back what once belonged to them. So, what we need to do is to destroy them. To wipe them out from this world. Orgrim raised his warhammer and pointed it towards the north. Orcs, north, attack. Chapter 252. Orgrim's speech was simple and violent. Needless to say, there would naturally be people who would describe the richness of the continent in the north. All he needed to do was tell his tribesmen where the enemy was, and his tribesmen, who had become extremely violent after drinking the demon's blood, would swarm towards them. Unlike most beastmen, Orgrim was extremely calm and clear-headed. Not only did he carefully study the map and confirm the situation in the nearby seas, he had also started to learn the human common language after leaving Stormwind City. Orgrim purposely kept a family of captives and used their relatives as a hostage to force an old woman to teach him the common language. From pointing to the simplest items, such as a rock, Orgrim compared the pronunciation and verified his translation results one by one. This was very boring and not understood by most beastmen. However, in this crossing of the sea, Orgrim produced the corresponding results. He had seen the route of the transport fleet on a captured military map. He was very clear about the power of the huge human warships on the sea. The rumbling of the cannons could easily send more than 10 beastmen flying at the same time. The beastmen did not have the slightest ability to fight back on the sea. Therefore, Orgrim's chosen route was to start from Paladin Bay on the other side of the wetlands and head northeast to reach the shallow waters with quite a lot of underwater reefs. Then he would follow the sea between Rapids Fort and Tangarock and head north all the way to the eastern beach next to South Shore. This way, he could allow the main force to avoid the most powerful human fleet on the sea. Orgrim considered the Murlocs and Nagas who worked for the humans, but he felt that there were too few of them to be a threat to the Horde. He did not intend to allow the main force to land on the eastern beach because the mountains there were more steep and the entire beach was covered by the humans' arrows and ballistae. If they landed there, even a victory would be a Pyrrhic one. The western coast of South Shore was different. There were more rocks on the coast, which was convenient for concealment and cover. There were too few people with brains in the Horde. Orgrim could only personally calculate the time of departure and arrival. His calculations were very accurate. If there were no accidents along the way, then the first batch of transport ships would arrive late at night. After the decoy fleet, the main force would land around 4:30 in the morning. As long as the main force could successfully land. When the main force of the Horde reached South Shore, it would just be morning. The warriors of the tribe would have a whole day to deal with the humans. Orgrim believed that with the beastmen's unparalleled stamina and endurance, even if the weaker humans could defend themselves for a while, they would be worn down and destroyed after a few hours. Orgrim firmly believed that. In fact, on the Alliance's side, General Dalen, who had already led his fleet out to sea, slammed the table and cursed when he heard the time it would take for the Horde to pass the sniper position. Doesn't this make our entire fleet into mascots at sea? Dai Lin felt irritated as he looked at the dark sea through the monocular. The orc leader is obviously not a brute who only knows how to charge. You've met your match, Dai. It was a beautiful lady with long blonde hair and long pointy ears. She stood beside Dai Lin. This was a position that was closer to Dai Lin than the guards of the royal family. All of these indicated that this elven mage had a special status. Indeed, this high elf mage's name was Gina Goldsword, and she was King Delen's lover. This was an almost open secret. Is there any news? Yes, your favorite little Duque sent a message. He said that the plan remains the same. Dai Lin suddenly calmed down. He was very sure that Duque had a special way to change the situation. In this era, unless the ships were less than 100 meters apart, there was no such thing as a night battle. Since Duque told him that the plan remained the same, he would wait for that opportunity. It was late at night, and the moon was shrouded in dark clouds. Looking out over the dark sea was a very boring task. Many new lookouts would fall asleep in such a situation. But no one could sleep tonight. All the Marines were told that they would be engaged in an unprecedented night battle. This determined that the powerful Kor Dyla's fleet would either gain nothing from this battle and be left to the side, or they would be promoted to become hunters of the night. The huge fleet was arranged in a straight line parallel to the distant coastline. This was the best choice for maximizing the fleet's firepower against an opponent who could not fight back. The helmsman stared at the stern lights of friendly ships not far ahead, carefully maintaining a distance and formation. In the distant darkness, the first reflection appeared. This quickly attracted the attention of the lookout and Admiral Dai Lin. Then, more blurry light spots appeared in the darkness. Like slowly rising fireworks, milky white light balls floated high into the sky. In just a few seconds, the surface of the sea lit up even more brightly, illuminating a large part of the coastal area near the coast as if it was daytime. Light spell? Why is it there? Dai Lin was not a mage, so he was not too sure. The high elf mage, Gina, left. If a human or high elf mage apprentice made such a substandard spell, he would definitely be severely punished by his mentor. But for a murloc, this is already very good. Murloc? It's actually a murloc mage? As someone who had spent a long time at sea and dealt with murlocs, nagas, and various sea monsters for half his life, Dai Lin certainly knew that there was a branch of murloc wise men among the murlocs. However, those ridiculous murloc wise men were the worst spellcasters. The ice arrows they shot could only form ice that was less than a finger's width in an area the size of a palm. They would scatter with a single slap. Unless they hit a vital point, there was no lethality to speak of. Dai Lin never thought that these murloc wise men, who could only cast level 1 spells at most, could be used in this way. They were weak scum. But after playing the role of a lighthouse, they were god-level teammates. In the binoculars, he saw that the orc transport ships in the area covered by the light were the target ships covered by iron sheets. Dai Lin shouted excitedly, "Open all cannons! Open fire! Open fire!" 2 minutes later, the Ku El Dila's fleet, which was already ready, let out a series of roars. Bang! 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 The so-called salvo was just an extremely short interval between all the cannons from the bow to the stern. If they fired at the same time, the terrifying recoil would destroy the entire deck and even the entire battleship. Even if the cannonballs did not arrive at the same time, the momentum was already very terrifying. A heavy rain of iron bullets streaked across the pitch-black sky and fell into the Horde's transport fleet with a unique screech that symbolized the arrival of the Grim Reaper. Chapter 253. In this era, the accuracy of a fleet's cannons was metaphysical. Not to mention that it was a night battle. These early breech-loading cannons were crude and had no way to improve the stability of the cannons. Yes, there was no rifling, no crosshairs, not even a stable firing base. Every shot would be affected by the recoil from the next shot, causing the ship to tilt. There were no recoil mechanisms or recoil mechanisms. After a shot, the wheels under the cannon retreated to reduce the recoil. Then, the cannons would be pushed back to their original positions. Even the best cannoneers had a worrisome hit rate. Not to mention the orcs' strange transport ships. They had no sails or decks. They were just a big turtle shell. This gave Dai Lin a headache. Hinge shells that could destroy the ship's masts and grapeshot shells that could kill the ship's crew could not be used. They could only rely on the most primitive cannons to shoot big iron balls to see if they could hit the enemy's vital parts and cause fatal damage. Dai Lin saw through his binoculars that a few cannons hit the enemy ships, but nothing happened. They either bounced off the ship's thick iron sheet or got stuck on the ship's roof. The orc laborers still rowed the oars with all their might, driving the ship quickly. Damn it! At this rate, I won't even be able to save 10%, let alone 60%. The cannons were fierce, and the water pillars were high. However, only a few orc transport ships were sunk. Admiral Dai Lin's balls hurt. At this time, the Nagas made their move. Many male Nagas jumped onto the water despite the fierce cannons. They brandished their huge tridents and fiercely hacked at the exposed oars. Often, after a single leap, more than 10 oars were cut off with a series of clattering sounds. The orc laborers in charge of rowing the ships did not know what was happening. They could see that the ships were already spinning, and the laborers were still rowing the oars so that the broken oars were slicing through the air. Good job. Admiral Dai Lin waved his arms excitedly. Send out the signal. Have the third fleet spread out and attack them at close range. The high elf mage frowned. Be careful of their counterattack. What are you afraid of? How could a transport ship with such a low railing and no turrets be able to launch a melee battle against our ship? Why should I be afraid of a transport ship that doesn't even have a ram? Dai Lin waved his hands nonchalantly. Thus, the third fleet approached. As the distance closed, the power and accuracy of the bombardment increased exponentially. The iron ball cannonball launched by the powerful momentum collided violently with the orc transport ship. The iron cannonball shattered under the tremendous impact, and so did the transport ship. At this time, the moon suddenly emerged from the clouds. Under the bright moonlight, one could clearly see the metal pieces and wood shavings flying in the air from the explosion. The dazzling light produced by the explosion announced the arrival of death. The cannonballs aimed at the ship's waterline were the most dangerous and brutal. Even if it didn't hit the target directly, a misfire near the ship's waterline would very likely cause the hull of the orc's inferior transport ship to crack. One after another, the huge metal transport ships began to sink. From the clamor that reached the sky, one could tell that every metal transport ship was filled with orc warriors. Perhaps on land, these warriors were omnipotent warriors who could charge forward bravely even after taking a dozen arrows. But in the sea, they were nothing. They were no different from weak babies. When the hull tilted, most of the entrances and exits could not be opened. The deck was originally covered with iron to increase the ship's defensive capabilities. This greatly increased the survivability of the people inside when the ship was not sinking. However, when the ship sank, it became a huge coffin. He led nearly 1,000 orc warriors and slowly sank to the bottom of the shallow sea. Ha! Ha! You want to play naval warfare with our cultiras? You bunch of green-skinned creatures are not qualified. Dai Lin laughed heartily. He even pulled Gina Goldsword over and gave her a kiss. In his field of vision, at least a dozen giant iron orc transport ships began to sink. More than 30 transport ships had lost their motor power because their oars had been broken and were floating or spinning on the surface of the sea. I've reported the situation to the deputy commander. The deputy commander has urgently informed your majesty that your fleet needs to retreat. Beware of the horde's desperate attacks. Beware of what? Beware of these transport ships with low sides, no towers, no ram, and no long-range weapons? Isn't he underestimating our cultira's fleet? Dai Lin suddenly thought of something. He wants his storm fleet to get some military merits too, right? I'll let them do it later. At this moment, it was as if the heavens wanted to slap him in the face. Dai Lin had successfully demonstrated what it meant by extreme joy turning to sorrow. Thousands of small and medium-sized transport ships suddenly rushed out where there was no light from flash. The biggest difference between these ships and the previous transport ships was that the bow of these ships was equipped with the sharp horn of some kind of huge creature. It was not a standard ram, but it was not much different if it was used for one-time use. General Dai Lin's face instantly turned pale. Retreat! Let the third fleet retreat. Dai Lin ordered in a panic. But it was too late. Even though the moonlight was good, when they discovered the swarm of small ships, Cultira's fleet could not do anything. Compared to the light boats that used oars, the sails of Cultira's were too slow in both turning and in speed. The result of their clumsiness was that the ships at the front were all surrounded by the horde's small ships. The horde's small transport ships crashed into Cultira's fleet. Then, a scene that left the people of Cultira's dumbfounded happened. The roofs of the transport ships were lifted off. They were not opened like loose leaf, but like a piece of cloth covering them. A bunch of orcs used brute force to flip the roofs that weighed who knew how many tons into the water. Then, without even using grappling hooks, they climbed up the ship's outer wall and onto the deck. Of course, their climbing was resisted by the sailors. Most of the orcs were blasted into the sea before they could climb up. Those that did not know how to swim would often drown. However, as more and more orc transport ships participated in the siege, General Dai Lin, who was a few hundred meters away, watched in shock as the warships of the Third Fleet were attacked one after another. Usually, a warship would be attacked by more than 10 small orc boats. When more than 10 bright green figures appeared on the deck, Dai Lin knew that the ship was finished. Retreat! Retreat quickly! Dai Lin closed his eyes. After painfully abandoning the third fleet that was mired in a chaotic battle, Dai Lin led the remaining ships and seriously depleted the tribe's forces with a mid-range bombardment that was very artistic and had a sense of distance. The Horde's fleet had achieved their goal. Under the heavy bombardment, they continued to sail towards South Shore. Chapter 254. South Shore was a small port town. Its size could not compare to any other port on the continent. Needless to say, Booty Bay or the deep-water harbors of the future, such as Storm Port and Menethil Port. However, with Duque's help, it became the busiest port in the entire northern continent after the refugees arrived at Stormwind City. At first, there was only a small wooden pier, but now there was a huge stone pier. It was no longer a place for civilian fishing boats, but a port for both commercial and military purposes. South Shore went from dark at night to a place where it was unsuitable to go out to sea unless there was a storm. Every day, from dawn until the moon rose above the sea, there was no rest. Merchants shipped goods from various ports, not just from the northern continent. Under the temptation of money, the goblins of Booty Bay risked their lives to deliver the goods that Duke ordered from them. Tens of thousands of people worked day in and day out, not to accumulate wealth for this port, but for the survival of the hundreds of thousands of refugees, as well as for the upcoming battle. Late at night, there was still an hour before the first rays of dawn appeared. The sea on the other side of South Shore was calm and tranquil, and there were only sparkling waves on the pitch-black surface of the sea. If the officers had not started the pre-battle mobilization, if the soldiers had not gone to bed early, been woken up early, put on their armor, and waited in the bunkers and trenches on the mountain, everyone would have thought that the battle that was about to happen was just an illusion that would never come. South Shore's command center was brightly lit. Most of the kings were not used to waking up in the middle of the night. For the older kings, Xion, Tarinas, and Eden, the impact was even more obvious. Most of them served refreshment drinks at hand. Duque sat on the seat that originally belonged to Lothar. He was the commander of this battle. Duque gently held his chin with his left hand and spat out 2 words through gritted teeth: "Ring the bell." Windsor was a very responsible soldier, and he would not miss Duque's order. He waved his hand and shouted, "The enemy is here. Enter the first phase." The clear and sharp bell rang next to the command center. Soon, the bell rang quickly, and more bell rings echoed around the entire South Shore like echoes. The 2 hills on the east and west sides of South Shore were in an uproar. It was as if the hills were the legendary guardians of the shadow elves, the mountain giants. The faint shouts of officers could be heard in the wind. They seemed to be scolding the soldiers who dared to doze off. Flare! Duque was a man of few words. The order was quickly passed down, and soon, a cannon sounded from the eastern hill of South Shore. A dazzling red ball of light was shot into the air. It was only then that the leaders of the alliance who were holding binoculars saw that countless small black shadows had appeared on the surface of the dark sea in the distance. It was much smaller than the warships they were used to seeing at the South Shore port. Compared to them, these small transport ships were like a bunch of leaves scattered on the water. However, these shadows that resembled leaves rapidly grew larger in everyone's field of vision. In just a moment, the shape of a ship appeared in their field of vision. The mages on the 2 sides of the hills released a large number of illumination spells. Countless white balls of light began to rise tens of meters above the beach, illuminating the entire beach as if it was daytime. The Horde's transport ships came. They did not slow down at all and crashed straight into the rocky eastern coast. Even though they were thousands of meters away, the kings in the command center could see a terrifying tremor from the hull of the ship. In their trance, they could even feel the wooden bottom of the boat wailing and the big iron nails on the deck struggling, making a sound that made their teeth ache as they escaped from the wood. Countless black shadows emerged from the ship. With the help of the light, the human guards on the shore quickly saw their enemies, the orc laborers. They did not wear armor and held the crudest mallets or primitive stone axes. Under the shouts of the few orc warriors, they somewhat foolishly charged towards the hills not far from the shore. First archer team, fire at will. Second archer team, get ready. It was not worth it to use up the physical strength of the archers to deal with the enemy's cannon fodder. However, High Lord Mograine of Rotterdam knew that the main characters today would not be the archers of Rotterdam. And according to the unparalleled deputy commander, after the archers used up their physical strength, there would be at least 3 hours for them to rest and recover. Just as Mograine glanced at the special seat on the top of the hill, the sound of bowstrings vibrating could be heard. The arrows were very accurate. Even if they could not hit the enemy's vital points, they would basically hit the enemy's body. Not bad. Servanas, who was bored to death in the special seats, commented. The not bad that Queen Sylvanas mentioned was almost at the level of a sharpshooter in the human world. The shooting skills of the archers of the Rotterdam Kingdom were all accumulated through countless times of shooting practice. They had started training at the age of 18, and most of these archers had more than 5 years of training. The arrows that each of them had used up would probably be worth hundreds of Arather gold coins. After coming here, Mograine had been depressed for a long time when he found out that the arrows of ordinary archers were useless against the orc warriors. The more lethal javelins were the way to go. Luckily, Duque had informed him that the archers could still be used on the enemy's cannon fodder. Regardless of whether this was recycling, at least the gold coins were used on the orc laborers. After a dozen breaths, the beach regained its peace. The laborers, who only had loud voices, were quickly shot by many arrows and died on the shore. More and more transport ships came ashore. The archers started to get busy. Their arms were sore from shooting continuously. Finally, the first batch of laborers started to fight their way to the front of the hill. General Abendis shouted, "Raise your spears, raise your shields, attack!" In front of the bunker at the bottom of the hill, the soldiers were already ready. They formed a long line of defense. Perhaps this was not enough to defend against the huge number of orc warriors. However, if it was used to deal with the laborers, it would be more than enough to let the new soldiers see some blood. Now, they waited and formed a sturdy shield wall with spears sticking out. There was no strategy to speak of. The scattered orc laborers who were attacking fiercely crashed into the shield wall. The shield wall was not damaged at all. Every laborer was stabbed to death. Chapter 255. The battle with the laborers was easy. Apart from the real blood, it was no different from using spears to stab scarecrows in training. Some soldiers were already teasing, "If the so-called warriors of the Horde are all like this, our team can kill 10,000 of them." Just then, after the second round of illumination, Abendis discovered that a huge transport ship had begun to rush ashore, and many taller figures with obvious armor appeared on the shore. The main force of the orcs was coming. Mograine ordered, "Blow the horn. Archers, cover. Let the soldiers with swords and shields and spears come back. We're about to enter the second phase." The unique horn of the Rotterdam army sounded, and the soldiers who were having fun killing at the front lines suddenly realized that it was time to retreat. Under the good light and the commander's orders, the soldiers retreated in an orderly manner. They followed the predetermined mountain path to the second line of defense that was higher above sea level. When he saw his soldiers retreating according to plan, General Abendis raised his sword and shouted, "First Javelin Brigade, shoot!" The long shadow immediately shot into the air, drawing a beautiful arc in the air. Then, it let out a sharp whistle and pierced downwards. Without any accidents, a considerable number of orc warriors were nailed to death at the bottom of the hill. However, many continued to charge. Abendis noticed that many orc warriors were better armed than what the intelligence had said. They were no longer the naked men described by the soldiers of Storm City, who only had brute strength. Their right shoulders, which held weapons, were covered with huge spiked pauldrons. Their heads were covered with horned helmets, and their chests were covered with a half-body armor that glowed with a metallic luster. Both of their forearms were covered with leather armors. They did not have armor on their lower bodies, only a belt that looked like a leather skirt. However, they were obviously wearing a pair of huge boots, which allowed them to pass through the complicated terrain of the battlefield better. Abendis quickly summoned a Dalajan mage who was in charge of communication and summarized the information to Duque. After receiving the news, there was silence in the command center. Noxus pursed his lips. Gentlemen, at least we have confirmed that our enemies are a group of intelligent creatures that can evolve. No one laughed at this lame joke. It was not funny at all. Duque glanced at the exquisite wall clock hanging in the command center. It was 4:30 in the morning. Tell Aurelia and Cervantes that it's their ranger's turn. Before Duque could finish his sentence, two voices echoed throughout the command center. I heard you. It was the voice of great demon Queen Aurelia. I'm going to go moldy, Queen, she complained. Then, the earth-shattering noise on the beach seemed to quiet down a lot. Whether it was Lang and Seamus on the eastern hill or Mograine and Abendis on the western hill, none of the commanders dared to believe their eyes. It had been too long since the humans had seen the elite High Elves Rangers. If the definition of a godly archer was to be able to kill one enemy with one arrow, then these Rangers were super godly archers. They were simply monster-level existences. They could only hear the continuous twangs of bowstrings coming from higher up the hill. In just a few breaths, the densely packed tribes on the beach were all shot dead. The arrows were as accurate as if they had eyes, automatically navigating to the throats and other vital points of the orcs. In an instant, the entire beach was empty. Oh my God, what kind of strong reinforcements did our deputy commander bring back? This is equivalent to a 10,000-man archer legion, King Lang muttered to himself. General Seamus comforted Lang. I heard that the Windrunner family is the top ranger family in Quel Salis. Lang felt a little better after hearing that. General Seamus was right about this. The Windrunner family's rangers were indeed the most powerful among the High Elves. Looking at the entire human world, including the High Elves and even the more powerful Night Elves, there was no army that could compare to the Windrunner family's archers. Perhaps the legendary mysterious army that belonged to High Priestess Tyrant could compare to the Windrunner family's rangers. However, the horrors of the tribes were not only in their powerful individual combat power, but also in their terrifying numbers. When they found that there were more and more ships anchored on the western coast, the irascible orcs decisively ignored the orders from their superiors and began to rush their ships to any place that could be anchored. For example, the eastern beach, which had higher mountains and was better defended by humans. Another example was the harbor of South Shore itself. When the first light of dawn broke, the main force of the Horde's beach landing battle finally arrived. The gigantic iron ship crashed into the stone pier with a loud bang, causing the entire pier to shake. Duke saw through his binoculars that the deep water port that he had spent a long time building was smashed into by the group of bastards, and the sky was filled with flying rocks. Duke wished he could kill all the orcs. Damn it, my secret stash. Duque muttered in his heart. On the other side, Turayan was also muttering, in the name of the holy light, they are too ugly. Even though Lothar and Duque had described them before, it was still a far cry from seeing them with his own eyes. He did not know if the stronger the orcs were, the uglier they were. Turayan, who had personally witnessed the death of the tribe's laborers, had originally thought that the Horde's warriors were about the size of burly humans, with light green skin and two huge tiger teeth in their mouths. Now, Turayan realized that he was completely wrong. The real warriors of the tribe were taller and more burly, and they looked even uglier. They had bright green skin and red eyes that were even redder than a rabbit's. And those huge fangs that could not even be covered by their lips. Turayan swore that he had only seen something like this on a wild boar. But wild boars did not walk on 2 feet, nor did they carry huge heavy weapons, nor did they wear heavy armor. Duque pretended to observe with his binoculars, and then said the answer that was marked in the system notification, "All right, generals, I have good news and bad news." Everyone immediately pricked up their ears. The good news is that the Horde is finally willing to put in the main force. Lothar, you can consider calling back the reserve troops that were stationed outside. Lothar smiled slightly. To be on the safe side, Lothar divided about 1/3 of the troops that had been gathered in South Shore and placed them in the middle of the Hillsbrad Hills, which was probably the inland area between South Shore and Atonement Island. Lothar did not comment on Duque's suggestion, because if they called back the reserve troops, they might not be of any help. If they did not call back the reserve troops, they could still be used as insurance. At most, they would receive complaints from 1 or 2 kings that their troops could not do anything. Lothar smiled and asked, "What about the bad news?" Chapter 256. It's the Warsong clan from the tribe. They're not just good at fighting, they're quite good at it. What we need to pay attention to is the roar of their chief, Grumhel. He's a top-notch person, especially you, Commander-in-Chief Lothar. I don't want the Commander-in-Chief of the Alliance to be at the front. I know you're good at fighting too, but there are so many generals around. As the Commander-in-Chief, do you have the cheek to steal the credit of your subordinates? Initially, when he heard Duque say that Grum was impressive, Lothar was really eager to give it a try. After hearing what Duque said, Lothar could only raise his hands to indicate that he wouldn't go to the front line. There was a silent commotion among the other generals when Lothar didn't take action. Pairs of burning eyes looked at Duque, eager for Duque to call out the name of a certain person or a certain legion. The current situation was like a predetermined victory. The only difference was whether the price paid was high. However, it seemed like it would be a great victory for now. Everyone yearned for victory. The kings, who had different thoughts in the first place, were even more eager for their legions to perform well in this battle, because it would affect their country's right to speak in the alliance. Trash had no rights. That wasn't just a matter of words. More and more transport ships arrived at the seaside. There were so many ships from the tribe that the long coastline was actually not enough for all of them. The brave warriors of the Warsong clan pushed the front line to the middle of the mountain. They endured the fist-sized rocks that filled the sky and the arrows that could easily penetrate their bodies. When one fell, another would immediately take his place. When a group fell, a new group would immediately rush in. They were using their flesh and blood to corrode the humans' defense line at a high speed. The agile movements of the Warsong clan warriors, their exaggerated jumping ability, and their violent strength made the soldiers of the Rotterdam very uncomfortable. In just 10 minutes, Mograine had already sent out the reserve team for the 3rd time. Even though he still had sufficient reserves, the sight of such a meat grinder made his heart bleed. They were all the elites of the Rotterdam kingdom. At this moment, 2 red signal flares rose in the direction of the headquarters. In this world where the light of dawn was still very faint, it was especially dazzling. In the east, the 4th Fleet, which had been waiting for a long time, puffed up their sails and arrived at the battlefield within 15 minutes. Then, far from the coast, they fired their cannons at the densely packed coastline. From today onwards, this cruel weapon would probably become one of the most hated weapons in the tribe. 100 thumb-sized, relatively round iron lumps could be stuffed into a huge cannon chamber. Because of the short range, Commander Kutiras ordered that each cannon be loaded with 20% less gunpowder and 30% more grapeshot than usual. Bang! 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 Following the loud roar, the coastline that was not particularly wide was immediately set off in a storm of blood. The new armor that the orcs had obtained from the dwarven slaves was completely unable to withstand the impact of such hot weapons. A head-sized bloody hole would immediately appear on their bodies if they were hit by it. Even the lightest injury would be a broken arm or leg. Large pieces of broken limbs flew into the air. There were split heads, splattered intestines, and broken weapons. In a few breaths, the entire coastline had become the orcs' shuraba. The seawater that surged up along with the tide was all dyed red with the blood of the orcs. The tragic scarlet spread hundreds of meters away on the surface of the sea, and it was all orc blood. The tribe's commander ordered the transport ship to rush towards Kutiras's battleship. Unfortunately, it did not work this time. An orc laborer who was rowing the boat could not help but exclaim, "There's something down there, there's a lot of it." The laborer pointed at the large opening for the oars. As soon as he finished speaking, he was dragged underwater along with the oars. Blood gushed out, and it seemed that he would not survive. At this time, there were already quite a number of slightly fat black figures on the surface of the sea. Colorful triangular dorsal fins broke through the water surface, forming white waves. Those who were familiar with them would know at a glance that they were murlocs. It was not the first time that the tribe had dealt with the murlocs. They also knew that the humans of Stormwind City had the ability to tame the murlocs, although they did not know which one. It felt as normal as an orc taming a warg. That alone was not enough to alert the tribe. Until the tribe suddenly realized that the number of murlocs was 2F** king ridiculous. It was impossible to count how many there were. All they knew was that this was definitely more than 10,000. Not only the orcs, but even the human guards on the hill were stunned. At first, Duque did not send out the murlocs because Duque felt that it would not be effective to let the murlocs intercept the transport ships rushing towards the coast at high speed. Now it was different. Most of the gaps along the coast had been filled. If the tribe wanted to reach the shore, they would either have to smash the butt of their own ship and disembark in deeper water, or they would continue west to find a place to dock. In fact, continuing west was the right choice. But the appearance of Ku-Tiraz's fleet dispelled the tribe's commander's thoughts. What was worse was that the transport ships that attempted to attack the Alliance's fleet had all stopped. If the tribe's ships were powered by sails, the murlocs would not be able to cut off the ship's power. But it was oars. For the murlocs to deal with wooden oars that were not specially reinforced was a matter of minutes. Under the command of the Murloc Oracle Maugre, the murlocs also became smarter. They worked hard to destroy every horde transport ship. They used all kinds of methods to break the oars of the laborers and dig into the bottom of the horde transport ships. Like sardines, the transport ships were packed with hundreds of people. Even if one of them sank, it would be a big loss to the tribe. Looking at the situation of the battle, the 5 kings in the command center were all beaming with joy. Yo, horde, hurry up and play your cards. I don't know who the commander is, but if you don't play your cards, I'll have to take the lives of another 100,000 orcs this time. At this moment, a loud noise suddenly erupted from one of the large battleships in Ku-Tiraz's fleet. In the next second, the huge mast broke, pulling the entire ship and causing it to tilt at an angle of 60 degrees to the water. If the first attack could be reluctantly attributed to an accident, then the second attack was witnessed by Duque with his own eyes. On the left side of the battleship's bow, a huge crack about half a meter wide and at least 7 or 8 meters long was drawn out by a Black Shadow's weapon like it was killing a fish. The entire hull of the battleship let out a sad cry, then the huge bow suddenly broke, the hull tilted, and a large amount of seawater poured into the cabin. Duque could clearly see that many human soldiers had already jumped into the sea to escape. Damn, who was it? That didn't make sense? Duque screamed in his heart. The next moment, he saw the killer's weapon. It was a dark red axe that looked like a hook. That was a certain Roar's signature weapon, Blood Howl. Chapter 257. Grom Hellroar was mighty and domineering. Whether it was his trademark roar, his courage, or his unparalleled violent attack power. Tearing a lion apart with his bare hands and going through countless battles without a single defeat was not enough to describe the domineering Grom, whom Duque had called Lord Howl before he transmigrated. If one had to describe Grom's strength in one sentence, it would be that he could dismantle a Gundam with his bare hands. The story began with Grom's father, Galmash Hellroar, whom Duque called Grandpa Howl. Galmash was the chief of the Warsong clan. He was a powerful warrior during his lifetime and was known as the Giant Butcher. Few orcs could be like him, both deeply respected by his own clansmen and terrifying his enemies. One time, Galmash and his clansmen encountered a huge Golem, and a fierce battle ensued. What was a Golem? A Golem was a terrifying one-eyed monster that was 2 or 3 times taller than an ogre. Duque believed that only the one-eyed giants of ancient Greece before he transmigrated could be the prototype of this monster called Golem. During the fierce battle, Galmash was caught by the Golem. When his body was bitten to pieces by the Golem's guillotine-like mouth, Galmash endured the pain and used the last of his strength to chop his battle-axe, Gorehowl, into the Golem's eye before he died. When they fell, the first to die was the Golem. After this battle, Gorehowl became famous everywhere and became the symbol of the Warsong clan's chief. Galmash eventually earned the surname Hellroar for his clan. The Hellroar clan was also very good at fighting huge things. For example, such a huge warship had been dismantled by Grom in a few moves. Were the tribal heroes really monsters? Although Duque wanted to push Lothar, who had the highest combat power on his side, and Uther, who had just arrived last night, to fight Lord Howl for 300 rounds, the problem was that this was AF** King naval battle. Could Lothar and Uther, who were fully armored, win? Don't be ridiculous. If these two powerful people drowned because of this reason, Duque would not be able to forgive himself. Just as Uther was about to step out and ask to fight with a fearless spirit of sacrifice, Duque said, "Hey, Aurelia, Servanus, do you hear me?" An echo immediately came from the wind. Aurelia awaits Deputy Commander's orders. Yo, there's finally something exciting to do? Duque cleared his throat and said, "I want you two sisters to deal with the onion-haired orc chief who just tore down our warship." Yes, the one with the blood-red hooked axe. His name was Grom Hellscream, and he was one of the strongest fighters in the Horde. Don't be careless. I promise I'll kill him. Aurelia was as steady as ever. Sister, let's not compete in killing enemies. Those moving targets aren't that great. Let's compete to see who can kill more chiefs. This time, it was a voice that only Duque could hear. Duque was under a lot of pressure when faced with such an off-topic Queen Sylvanas. Uther couldn't help it anymore. He stepped forward and said, "Deputy Commander, Uther and his Silver Hand request to fight." Duque glanced at Uther, who was much older than him, and said, "I know your chivalry can't stand having a woman fight on your behalf. But I want to tell you, first, don't treat the sisters as weak. Second, unless you're very good at swimming in armor, leave it to the two sisters." Uther was quite annoyed by Duque, but as a noble paladin, he knew very well that Duque was not targeting him or looking down on his silver hand. It was just that Uther was as puzzled as the other generals. Why did Duque seem to know their abilities and specialties so well? From the beginning of the Battle of Southshore, Duque's formation had no flaws or problems. Not only could he predict the enemy, but he was also very clear about his own people. The problem was that Duque hadn't even visited their troops. Naturally, Duque didn't have time to explain to them. Or perhaps Duque couldn't explain at all. He'd arranged it according to which of them was more powerful in history. No matter what, the destructive power of a heroic existence was shocking. As someone who also had a heroic template, Lord Howl had already used Blood Howl to dismantle 5 warships of various sizes by the time the Windrunner sisters arrived. Grom didn't let his guard down at all just because the two beautiful elven rangers were dainty and delicate. On the contrary, his instincts towards the strong made Grom very nervous. It was as if he was a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. His ability to jump over the transport ships and even the junk floating on the sea was beyond Grom's imagination. This level of agility was unheard of. Grom Hellscream felt a wave of disgust. This was the unique aesthetics of the orcs. The Windrunner sisters were as beautiful as goddesses in the eyes of humans, but in the eyes of the orcs, who loved broad shoulders, thick waists, and large hips, they were weak goods that couldn't give birth to strong children. Lord Howl's disdainful gaze made Aurelia the Great Demon King and Queen Sylvanas even more displeased. 6 nostrils and 3 heroes snorted coldly. It had to be said that this was a strange misunderstanding. It didn't matter. Only a dead enemy was the best enemy. This principle was applicable in every world. Since they didn't speak the same language, there was no need to greet each other. The Windrunner sisters and Lord Howl faced each other directly. They moved forward on the waves so fast that the naked eye couldn't keep up with them. The Windrunner sisters stood on the left and right. They shot a barrage of arrows while approaching Lord Howl at high speed. Grom grabbed a stack of shields hanging on the railing of the ship. He easily tore the ropes binding the shields. They were originally used by humans for boarding battles, but Lord Howl pulled them up. 5 or 6 shields turned into flying discs that could cut a human in half and were thrown out. Of course, such a rough throw wouldn't hit. Servanas actually took a step forward with her slender and beautiful legs, stepping on those floating shields and flying high up in the sky. In just 10 seconds, Grom was hit by at least 30 arrows. He looked bloody and miserable, but the Windrunner sisters realized that none of the arrows actually penetrated Grom's muscles or hit his organs. The arrows that were aimed at Grom's fatal spots were either blocked or dodged by Bloodhowl. Just as the Windrunner sisters were within 5 meters of Grom, Lord Howl counterattacked. A deafening roar spread out like a shockwave around the sinking ship, and the two sisters trembled. The next moment, the wooden boards under Lord Howl's feet turned to dust. With a swift leap, he slashed at Sylvanas. Chapter 258. Lord Howl's leap slash was unscientific. In a fantasy world with all kinds of special skills, talking about science was bullsh*t. It looked like a simple leap and fall, but whether it was going up or down, it had nothing to do with the acceleration of gravity. Bloodhowl's blazing red light shot into the sky. For a moment, it was like a scarlet sun had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It was shocking and dazzling. The next moment, Grom, who held the axe with both hands, slashed down like a falling meteor. Speed up, speed up, speed up continuously. Insanely fast speed up. A moment ago, Grom was still about 10 meters away from Sylvanas. It felt like Queen Sylvanas could easily dodge with a light stomp of her feet. In the next moment, the sharp tip of the axe had already chopped down on a few strands of Queen Syriana's bangs that were leaking out of her hood. At this moment, the sharp whistle of the axe cutting through the air had just spread. This attack broke the speed of sound. This was the attack that the Hellscream family was famous for. Lord Howl's father had used this attack to kill countless ogres and Goblin. Lord Howl himself would also kill the night elf demigod Cenarius and the demon lord of the abyss, Manaroth, who was even bigger than the heavy truck Duque was in before he transmigrated. No, when Duque, who was in the command center, saw this scene through the magician's eye that had been monitoring the battlefield, he was so shocked that he stood up abruptly. Cold sweat instantly soaked his entire back. Could it be that Queen Sylvanas, who was supposed to shine brightly on the stage of the world of Azeroth in the future, would fall here? It was still World War II at the Dark Portal. There was no Doomsday Army at all. It could be said that Queen Sylvanas' death here was death. She would never be reincarnated. Unless, Duque did not dare to imagine it. However, in his nervousness and shock, Duque had forgotten someone, Aurelia. As the big sister of the Windrunner family, how could she let her sister die in front of her? Indeed, Sylvanas was still immature. She was far from the all-powerful Dark Ranger and Queen of the Undead in the future, who could shake the world with a stomp of her foot. This was the reason why Duque had asked the two sisters to deal with Master Ho in the name of the Alliance's deputy marshal. Aurelia raised her leg and kicked Queen Sylvanas in the butt, allowing her to narrowly avoid the attack. Bloodhowl was still slashing down. Seeing that she could not hit Aurelia, Queen Sylvie was about to chop off one of Aurelia's legs. Illyria's battle-hardened experience came into play. In that split second, she used the 3 arrows in her right hand to stab Grom's face. At the same time, the muscles on her abdomen bulged. She used her waist strength to turn her kick into a whip kick towards Grom's knee. Perhaps Grom could chop off one of Aurelia's legs. However, the price was that Master Ho's face would be pierced by 3 arrows. This was a fighting style that traded injuries for lives. Grom's expression changed, and a serious expression appeared on his rugged face. He didn't expect that such a delicate and strange human could actually have such a ferocious fighting style. He finally realized that it wouldn't be that easy to win. Grom canceled his jump slash. The muscles on his arm bulged and he swung a whirlwind slash instead of a slash. In the blink of an eye, a violent tornado appeared. All the surrounding wood was chopped into sawdust, and even the seawater was sucked away. Grom looked like a small tornado on the ocean. The Windrunner sisters jumped away swiftly. "Sister, are you all right?" Sylvanas knew that her carelessness had dragged her sister into this. She couldn't help but look at Aurelia's leg, which had been cut into pieces and was bleeding. Aurelia's face twitched. She wanted to comfort her sister and say that she was fine, but in the end she said in High Elf language, I'm fine, but I'll be a little slower. Orcs had thick skin and flesh, so they were fine even after being hit by dozens of arrows. However, for the Windrunner, who relied on speed and agility for a living, being a little slower could mean the difference between life and death. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Grom's strong physique allowed him to make many mistakes. If the Windrunner sisters made one mistake, they would be doomed eternally. Gritting her teeth, Queen Sylvanas said coldly, "Sister, cover him from afar." But even though she was a little worried, this was the only way. While Grom's whirlwind slash was over, Sylvanas slung her longbow and unsheathed her sword. Aurelia, on the other hand, opened up a distance of 20 meters and covered her sister with a continuous barrage of shots. In the command center, Duque finally relaxed when he saw that the Windrunner sisters and Hellscream were evenly matched. This was an exchange of chess pieces. Duque suddenly had an idea. He wasn't afraid of the orcs attacking with a large army, but what if a few powerful chiefs came? Although there was only one Hellscream, there were many talented orcs, and Grom Hellscream wasn't the only one. There were also Gujar and Samuro. Wait. Samuro! Duque suddenly realized where his weakness was. Tyrion Fordring. Unsure why Duque would call his name without Uther, Tyrion, who was ready to go down the mountain at any time, stepped forward. I'm worried about General Lang Rin at the front lines. I need you to go there immediately and follow General Lang closely during this battle. Bodyguard. Tyrion's face was a little gloomy. In his opinion, a paladin should be the kind of person who charged and broke through enemy lines, not a bodyguard. Duque's voice came again. I suddenly remembered that the orcs have a special class called Blade Master. They have a stealth ability similar to thieves, but they move faster and seem to have some kind of strange power when they attack. Tyrion, this is a heavy responsibility. If something happens to General Lang, it will be a heavy blow to not only the battle for South Shore, but the entire alliance. If you go this time, no matter what happens, I will remember you. Understood. Duque's transfer was a matter of life and death. Ryan was wearing a golden helmet and armor. Although he could arouse the courage of the Storm Wind soldiers, his existence was also very conspicuous to the tribe. Just as a sword suddenly slashed at Lang from behind, Tyrion arrived. Holy shock! One of the few long-range attacks of a paladin. The attack came at the most needed time and place. The sneak attack stunned the Blade Master for a moment. It was also at this moment that Lang and General Tom realized what was going on. Two intersecting swords slashed at the blurry figure that was gradually becoming clearer. However, this Blade Master obviously didn't give up. Blade Storm suddenly rolled up. Chapter 259. It was another tornado-like attack, but compared to Grom's whirlwind slash, the Blade Storm was the real tornado, the real killer move. A terrifying tornado made of blood and wind swept up from the top of the mountain. Under the high-speed rotation, whether it was Theon, Lang, or Tom, they all lost track of the mysterious sword saint who had ambushed them. They could barely see a green figure spinning at high speed in the turbulent air currents. As Lang retreated with his sword, the Wang family guards beside him rushed forward without any regard for their own lives. The result was that the guards were instantly minced into meat paste. Looking at the familiar faces he had known for many years being killed by the sword, Lang almost wanted to rush into the storm of sword energy and fight it out with the other party. Tom Seamus slammed backwards, using his sturdy pauldrons to push Lang out of the blade storm's killing range. However, the other party chased after him like a shadow, determined to kill Lang. This was no longer a swordsmanship. The high-speed rotation of his body brought with it countless sword energies that were like real swords, slashing horizontally at everything that tried to block his way. The human bodies clad in standard iron armor, the thickened shields wrapped in wooden planks, the trenches dug around the mountain, and the stone pillboxes, everything looked so sturdy. However, all these seemingly indestructible things had become victims of the Blade Storm's terrifying meat grinder. The human body was cut into pieces, and even if it was picked up, it would not know how to piece it back together. The shield was cut into pieces. The trenches were instantly opened up. and the stone pillbox was directly lifted off the roof. The attack of this berserk sword saint was completely beyond human imagination. At this moment, Lang suddenly calmed down and accepted reality. He was very grateful to Tyrion Fordring, who came at the last moment, and he knew very well that he was sent by Duque at a critical moment. But this kind of power was not something a mortal could resist, right? Listening to the high-speed cutting sound, Lang helplessly closed his eyes with a bitter smile. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5 seconds. The blade that represented death never came. Instead, it emitted an intense sound of metal clashing not far from him. Theon's tall and burly figure stood in front of him and Seamus like a nail. The storm of blades slashed at him. Countless swords on his body? Dismember the corpse into 10,000 pieces? None of this happened. Instead, Lang saw an oval cover that glowed with a holy golden light appear on Theon's body. It was this shield that withstood the seemingly invincible blade storm. Was this really a god? Looking at the System Elf's report, Duque was a little confused. Congratulations, Tyrion Fordring, who you urgently dispatched to the eastern battlefield, saved King Lang at the critical moment with blessing of sacrifice and divine protection. King Lang's attitude towards you has risen to entrust life and death. Duque knew what it meant, but Duque was more interested in Theon's two skills. Blessing of sacrifice. Use the power of the holy light to protect an ally, so that the user of the blessing bears a portion of any kind of damage. Divine protection. Stimulate the holy light in the body, using the power of the holy light to make oneself immune to all attacks for a few seconds. The holy light in this world seemed to be more powerful than he had imagined. On the other side, seeing that he couldn't kill Lang even with his ultimate move, the mysterious sword saint reluctantly retreated. His figure disappeared into thin air. After using his ultimate move, he would probably fall into a period of weakness for a long time. That kind of terrifying move, which concentrated all of his strength for a few days in an instant, would not come without a price. He wouldn't have to worry about that guy for a long time. At this time, in the image of the mage's eyes, he saw that Duque had sent Theon to save King Lang. There was a burst of applause in the command center. That's amazing! Vice Commander! Oh my God, how did you think of that? Duque was flattered because this was praise from the 5 kings of the Alliance. Although he had saved his boss, saving Lang was also helping these kings. With a great enemy in front of them, no one wanted the Alliance to fall apart. Well, now we just need to... Before Duque finished speaking, he saw a hunchbacked figure appear in the vision of the mage's eyes. In the next instant, the mage's eyes was destroyed. However, Duque saw that on the 2 hilltops closest to the port, 2 fire rain areas the size of 4 football fields had fallen. A fire rain area the size of 8 football fields? Was this done by an ordinary warlock? Duke and Antonidas looked out of the window at the same time, looking at the burning hills in the distance, and the people on fire who were writhing in pain. Those little people on fire in their field of vision were the elites of the Alliance. On top of the hill, the volume of the screams suddenly doubled, and then quickly quieted down. And on the beach, naturally, the cheers of the orcs burst out. With the help of the System Elf, a figure that was originally just a small black dot rapidly expanded in Duque's vision, and expanded again and again. It was a hunchbacked orc holding an evil skull staff. His face was old, his movements unsteady, and his back was full of huge bone spikes. It felt like this guy didn't need anyone to touch him. He might throw himself to his death on the road in the next second. But no matter who Duque looked down on, he wouldn't look down on this mysterious orc who used water float to stand on the waves, his body swaying up and down with the waves. He was the terrifying existence that stood at the end of the path of evil in the mortal world. The muscles on Duque's face kept twitching, and his face was ashen as he squeezed out 3 words with great difficulty. Ghoul, Dan. Duque was absolutely sure that the historical ghoul, Dan, did not participate in the Battle of the Hillsbrad Hills. He didn't know if it was because the butterfly Duque had changed the course of fate too much, but it actually attracted Ghoul, Dan. The only thing he could rejoice about now was that Ghoul, Dan was no longer that demigod ghoul, Dan. After being tricked by Mediv, ghoul, Dan's strength had dropped by at least half. Unfortunately, even if ghoul, Dan's strength had dropped by half, he was still not someone that the Sky Wizard Duque could contend against. Duque walked over to Antonidas and bowed deeply. Apologies, Chairman Antonidas. The other party was once a demigod warlock, the strongest orc in the mysterious domain, Ghoul Thin. Other than you, only Qul Salis Sun King can contend against him. Facing the expectant gazes from all directions, Antonidas leaned on his staff and stroked his long white beard, his face filled with the pride of a strong person. Ha! The Dalajan will not refuse responsibility. The same goes for the Dalajan chairman. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.